What's up, guys? It's Johnny Candido of the Candido Forever program. We have a new form check here coming fresh off the press. Also, openings are now up for the next Q&A. So next week's Q&A, if you ask a question within the next 2 days, 48 hours, 100% certainty will be answered. Every time that's how this works. When something's posted, there's a new opening for the next thing. Now, another point is that I will almost certainly this weekend, but I would say the absolute latest, it would be early next week, but I think I'll be able to do it Saturday, is get a new program up for a downloadable sheet for pre-vacation program, which I've talked about a lot. So it'll be a 2 to 3 week, basically a 3-week burst, but you could just do 2 weeks of it. If you're in between programs, and I've talked about it many times, so I won't over-explain because I'll explain it when I do post it. But that will come up, and then I'm also going to start focusing on posting more programs now after that. So I will likely do a 5-rep max phase after that next. And I'll probably post a poll within the Candido Forever program Instagram channel, so be a part of that channel if you're not on Instagram for any type of polls, because I'll probably put up a poll on whether it should be a downloadable sheet or within the Candido Forever program, drop downs as far as that 5-rep max phase. It won't be as essential as the other parts, so I'm not 100% determined on if it should be there or not, but it's also a little bit more, it naturally flows more with that. If you did want to do a 5-rep max phase, 3-rep max, 10-week program, or do the 10-rep max, 5-rep max, all of them all in succession. It flows a little bit more than, let's say, the 6-week program, which is downloadable in this vacation program. Like, they're more off to the side. This one's like right at an in-betweener. And then finally, I am considering some things as far as some format adjustments to the UI of everything. So there's a lot of stuff coming up to where I may make actually a big move with where the Candido Forever program is and how the format is, because I do want to really just step things up to make it as immersive as possible and just have it to where there's basically a format to where, maybe I am on some sort of medium to where I'm communicating with you guys every day if possible. So I'm doing a lot of different things. So that's part of the reason why the price was now changed to $49.99 a month, because I really want to just step this all up into being an immersive, basically group coaching experience and not just, programs just kind of laid out. But that being said, that's also why we got these form checks. As always, make sure to let your friends know about it. And that's actually one thing that could be coming up is there's a potential opportunity for you guys to get a percentage of profit basically off of referrals in the future if I do make a certain switch. And I would actually want it to be hefty, like 20 to 25%. So then if you're on the Forever program, then you get 3 or 4 other friends, then basically it's free to you. So that would actually be really cool, and it'd be really natural, because obviously a lot of times people who come in are basically off of word of mouth from you guys. So but that being said, don't prevent the word of mouth. Keep getting the word out. But I definitely will be looking to just step everything up in terms of like just the overall network effect feeling of this all. So a lot of exciting things coming up. But that being said, let's get into the first form check. All right, first up we have Anubis, a long-time form checker, long-time lifter on the Candido Forever program. He says, "Greetings, Candido. I wanted to send you an update on my progress on the Candido Forever program and share my performance in his recent powerlifting meet. When I started the program back in 2023, my maxes were 330, 248, and 402 deadlift. Since then, I've steadily improved, and I best my numbers in 2024. Okay, all of his lifting increased this year as well, and my body weight less than 2 pounds. Okay, so I'll try to make this a little fast, but that's excellent news. Meet results in 2025. Okay, so in 2024, my third squat was 193 kilograms. Excellent progress. This year, my squat was 190 kilograms. Then I attempted 197.5 kilograms and had an issue. So wait, he hit it, but it didn't count. Then he attempted 197.5. Despite the second one looked easy, he missed. Okay, let me look at the... Okay. I don't think you have as many technical... Whoa. I don't think you have as many technical questions here. Let me see. Okay, so this is the 190 kilogram opener. Yeah, because from what I remember, especially since you've done a handful of form checks, your form's pretty locked. And, now, even just looking at this with fresh eyes, I definitely think that in the future, widening your squat stance will be wise, because this is a very, very narrow squat stance. So I would widen the stance just a little bit long term. I know we've talked about sumo versus conventional. Sometimes what can become tempting is as you switch from sumo to conventional to then just do everything really narrow and just go, okay, now I'm just in my pocket. The problem is that sometimes the overlap fatigue can become a problem on meet day. And then also one of the bigger issues is that you can just start to accept being at a disadvantage, because it's just leverage wise. It's hard to argue that you're at an advantage being this narrow versus if you were just, 2 inches, 3 inches out, nothing crazy, but enough out to where in this type of position, you're a little bit more upright relative to that forward knee position, because it just is a tough equation after a while. And usually that it's a good sign that you can adjust your technique if you're not good at grinding yet. Because when you've dialed in technique, and that's why I've been really good at grinding on meet days, because I was just really one of the more technical lifters, is like you just really find that sweet spot where you're like, you are just the strongest in it. Yeah, because it looks to me like you're actually even narrower here. Wow, this is actually really narrow. So you said you do hit it, right? Or this one you didn't. Okay, this was the third attempt. Okay. Okay, this is the second attempt. It could have to do with that level of narrow. You might have been slightly narrower on that last one, because that last one looked extremely narrow to me. It looked very, very slightly more narrow than this one. Yeah, so absolutely. So this one definitely makes me believe that you would benefit from slightly widening your stance with, because this is just, you're hitting this at such a speed that you easily should be able to squat 202.5 minimum. If not, I would say you should probably be able to grind 205. And then also the fact that you went on your heels is just another example of how difficult this narrow of a squat stance can be. So let's see why you went on your heels. Interesting. It didn't strike me that there was any one reason. Yeah. So like I said, I would very slightly widen the stance. I would actually keep the heeled shoes on and just very slightly just work to get out just a little bit more. But keep your same pattern as far as how you load the quads. So as far as, I do want to just address your last part first here. So you said you're starting the 20 rep max program. You look forward to also, will you be adding the bench and deadlift side quests? I love to incorporate them in my training as well. So because I mentioned that at the start, as far as some side quests is, I think the pre-vacation one will be a necessity. So that's going to happen, like I said, hopefully Saturday, hopefully this weekend, hopefully I'll be able to get it done. But if not, at the latest Monday or Tuesday. Then when it comes to the deadlift 20 rep max, I would say that will come, but probably certainly after the 5 rep max program. Because the 5 rep max program is one that I've been asked about a lot and really want to get up. And I would say that's more of a mid-level essential one, not essential, but it's definitely worth doing. And it'll basically be more of a true kind of off-season 4-week block, in the sense that the way that, for example, the 10 rep max phase, it was a volume blast with minimal variation. The 3 rep max phase is kind of an in-between where there's some variation, but there's some specificity as you're pushing, obviously, to 3 rep max. That's not the lightest thing. So 5 rep max will be right at that point where you can have even less specificity than the 3 rep max phase, back it off just a little bit, and have like a 1-to-1 ratio of low bar squat versus an SSB squat, something like that. So it'll be a little bit more with that intention. So that being said, after that, then I could see the deadlift 20 rep max program, definitely. I don't think for the bench right now, I don't have anything in mind though. So if you're talking about something like a 20 rep max bench program or something, then the answer to that for now is going to be no, just because I don't really see as much of a purpose yet for it. And I haven't done it personally, whereas all the other ones I've done 405 for potential 20 rep max on the squat. I've done in running, versions of that program. I've done the deadlift 20 rep max running versions of, that was actually the most similar to the squat program itself. So definitely making the deadlift one will not take me too much extra time too. That'll actually be the easiest. So like I was saying, I would say I would probably realistically plan for it to be in a month and a half from now for the deadlift one. And like I said, the first one will come within this week, and then the next one, the 5 rep max one, would probably be right at like exactly 1 month or 3.5 weeks, somewhere around that point. Maybe 2.5 weeks. We'll see, but somewhere in that 2 to 4 week range. But yeah, those are great questions. I just want to share my progress with you and say thanks for the program. It's been a huge part of my improvements. I'll keep pushing and refining things next meet. Let me know what you think and enjoy the videos. I hope you enjoy the videos. Yeah. I mean, so that squat, definitely, that's all I would point out. Now the bench, let's see what you mentioned progress-wise. Yeah, you made great progress. Went from 112.5 kilogram bench to 137.5. That's excellent. All right. Is this Dominican Republic Nationals? Is that what DR Nationals means? That's pretty cool. Is that what it means? I hope I'm right. It would always be funny if you're like, no, I'm in Cincinnati. That was very good. Yeah, your bench was very good. I'd say your bench, if that was the third attempt especially, that was the best lift. Yeah, you said third attempt. Your bench was the best lift, not only in terms, because I remember you always had a slow descent, and even though you're still pretty controlled here, that's fast relative to what you've done in the past, to my knowledge. And the main thing that you did a really good job of is you press up and back very well, and you bring your chest up. You know, it reminds me a lot of a Calgary barbell video. I don't know if I've ever linked that to you or if you've ever seen it, but he really exemplifies that well of making your chest meet the bar. So you do a fantastic job of doing that here. But again, the biggest thing is that you touch low enough while keeping the elbows flared enough. Now, you still probably long-term can get those elbows flared just a little bit more. I remember that was our talk before, and I still think you can improve that just a little bit. But as you press, see how you get out here? That's good. So again, I think you could just reduce that level of a difference. It's fine to have some difference on the eccentric versus concentric of the bench press. Like some people do prefer a little bit tuck and then corkscrew out, but they tend to be a little bit more moderate grip benchers. I would say I've never seen a completely efficient elite lifter have this level of a difference. So again, it's a subtle point, and right now it's pretty good, but what I suspect is it's similar to your squat. I suspect your ability to grind isn't as good as it should be. And the reason for that is because of what I'm talking about, is because you're in such a tuck position. If you miss, you're probably going to miss right off the chest because you're not going to be able to give yourself a chance until here to actually get your pecs involved. And most importantly, not even just muscularly, it's just you're in better alignment. And that's ultimately the issue, is when you are tucked, like you're literally going to lose it forward. So you probably just feel like, I didn't even get a press on it. If you did attempt 140 or 142.5. Actually, I think you would have hit 140 even with this form. I think 142.5 you would be able to hit. I think you'd be able to hit 142.5 or 145 if you did really get a little bit more flared and get into your chest the entire time. But it's a real nuance to be able to do that while still touching sufficiently low, because your touch point looks good. It could be possible that you might have to touch very slightly higher, just very slightly, because that is pretty low. That's a pretty low touch point. So you might have to touch like right here, but then have it totally boom to where you're able to press it up a little bit quicker. So overall, excellent work though. And you did a really good job at like you just corrected very strongly to where you pressed up and back, then straight, as opposed to some people, they go press straight and then up and back too late. And that's, that's worse. So I would say that bench technique, I would give it an 8.3 out of 10. And I think you can get that to like a 9.5 out of 10 with that flare fix. And that's all on the centric. That's the 8.3. The concentric on the way up, I'd say that was a 10 out of 10, honestly. Okay, for the deadlifts, I tried incorporating your advice that you've given me in the past. Keep in mind, I'm only started conventionals since January. Okay, so your max was 185 initially. Okay, so let's go straight to your third. Okay. Let's see what's going on here. Interesting. Okay, one thing I do notice, and I don't know if I've mentioned this to you before, but your grip, some people do this, like Ray Williams does this, but I'm not a fan of it, especially as long as you're not a super heavyweight lifter, is your underhand grip is pretty different than your overhand, like pretty drastically farther out. I mean, it looks like almost like the rings of the bar. Like you're gripping very wide on that underhand grip. And you can see it comes up asymmetrically. So that's one thing where I'm just not a fan of that. And I think you would be more efficient and stronger not doing that. And you got one red light probably indirectly caused from that. Because like, look at when it comes off. Just look at the way it moves. See, watch. Just the way it's, see that? Like, see how shifty it is? And in my opinion, that is because this underhand, look at that. That's the ring of the bar. That's your hand. Whereas you're basically at the start of knurling here. Given your size and everything, I would say I don't think you should have a problem being able to grip at the start of the knurling or close to it on both sides. So again, Nathaniel Messiah is my favorite example for conventional poolers. Just in general, I think he has fantastic technique. And he's a good example of someone who's pretty big. And he has a pretty wide stance. But see, okay, so he does do a little bit of what you're doing. So see how his underhand grip is just a little bit. I mean, yeah, he's got a decent amount of the knurling showing here and none there. Which, again, you know, I'm personally in favor of just complete symmetry. But, you know, it's one of those things where it's like different strokes for different folks. And like in the end of the day, if it does make you feel more locked in and stronger, that's fine. I mean, it definitely made me tempted to learn hook grip. But given you've had so much change to your deadlift from sumo to conventional, I wouldn't want you to change too much. The main point is if we take the least change approach possible. Again, the start of knurling looks to be basically right here. And you can see how for Messiah, yeah, the start of the knurling's closer on the underhand than the overhand, but see, it's still here where my mouse is. So it's still quite a bit away. And for you, it's pretty close to that start of the knurling. Or to that, not start of the knurling, to that ring. So again, I would definitely get that underhand side in, and he has a wider stance, and he's probably a little bit taller. I mean, this is a 788 attempt. Crazy. You know, I'm actually curious now, when he lifted at Worlds, did he do that? Okay, so let's see at Worlds, how was he? Okay, yeah, you see even more how it's pretty close. So yeah, it's not exactly symmetrical, but pretty dang close. And I think that's a great example for you to follow. That like, look, you just can get a little bit to where, look, he's nicely in there. Let me see Russell Orh's deadlift. Okay, so now if we see Russell Orh's deadlift, here he's deadlifting 805 in training. So see, he has a completely symmetrical deadlift. And he's been an OG in the game. He's been lifting longer than Nathaniel Messiah. So I think I'll give Russell the edge as far as what I consider to be more efficient. Wow, did he really disable comments because the lockout was a little bit suspect? Anyways. So yeah, this is great. I'll check just because you sent it. I check everything sent. I'll check the deadlift opener. I think we'll be able to see this example even clearer. And then yeah, then we'll move on. So I'd say overall, the most notable change I think is the squat, because that squat stance width can be a real big change. Wow, wait, you gripped differently this time. Yeah, now it looks like you gripped wider on the overhand than you did on the other one. Yeah, let me go back to here. Yeah, because I don't think you gripped as wide. Okay, you did grip a little bit wider than I realized on the overhand, but I think the difference is a little bit bigger on this one than it is on the other one. So yeah, I definitely, then given that, I definitely think you can narrow your grip across the board, because all these examples I've shown you, they all grip at the start of the knurling or very, very close to it. I mean, Nathaniel Messiah definitely does on his overhand 100%. And like I said, he's a taller, heavier lifter overall, to my knowledge. So yeah, I definitely think you can get that grip within a little bit narrower while still being totally true to your stance width. I don't think you have to change the stance width at all. And I think this, again, it also comes back to the idea of making sure that you don't have too much leg drive. Because I know we've talked about this before, that you both on your sumo and conventional, you really start with a really positive shin angle, which is fine, but ultimately that's going to be the thing that may have to go a little bit, because when you really jam your knees really far forward, it then starts to rub against your elbows more. And in the end of the day, we know that most people on a true max, they're going to be, a little bit more vertical shins than this. Not totally vertical, but somewhere in between this. So that's why it's better to not over dip the hips, because let's say like right here would be a really good start place. And this again is Rondell Hunt is the example I used last form check for so many people. And I think he's just a great example of the balance between high hips and still some leg drive. So see here. So see, I still get some leg drive, but not as much. And the real reason this is such a big advantage is not just because you're getting into your natural starting position more, but also because look at how narrow his grip is relative to where his knees are. So now he can get his feet, basically his hands right as close as possible to his feet. Obviously, you don't want to deadlift with the bar directly in front of your shins or anything, but you can really start to push that edge. And that's where you're going to get as efficient as possible. So see here, I mean, this is a large man, deadlifting with basically the same stance width relative to his frame as you, but able to get a slightly narrower grip, and compared to your underhand side, a much narrower grip. Now, again, I do want to reiterate, I do not want you to do hook grip because I just think you've changed a lot. So look at this. So now you notice something that now when he hits 937, his grip is narrower than when he missed 816 for 2. So you see that. So see his grip's slightly wider here. So you can see, you almost always see this, is that it's just more efficient to have as narrow as a grip as possible, as long as everything else isn't compromised. So again, let's see here. And you see that, yeah, he does get some leg drive, but not overdoing the leg drive. Keeping those hips high enough is absolutely critical to making sure that those arms can be nice and long. So see, boom. Whereas if he did and he hits this, yeah, and that's a world-class deadlift. Whereas if he dipped beyond this, it's still similar to yours. Like the way he moves is still similar. That's why he's a great example to look at. But you're just a little bit lower the way, and the knees get just a little bit more forward to where you're a little bit in conflict here. And also, I really want those arms to be long. So actually, I have a little bit more points of correction than I expected. Like this is perfect. But yeah. So overall, some of those programs definitely will be coming. Like I said, your squat, I would say, had a notable change with the stance width. Bench, the least amount of change with just the eccentric. And then deadlift, actually the most amount of change now looking at it. But without having to change too much else other than that. Okay, the next one. That was a good one. That was a good long start one. Next one is Donavan Maloney. He says, Dear Candido, congratulations on your marriage. Thank you very much. From the stories you posted, it looked like a beautiful ceremony. Thank you. Yeah, it was. It was at St. Joseph in downtown San Antonio. It was a beautiful, beautiful place. In terms of my deadlift lockout, I'm having trouble with the smooth transition to full lockout. My second and third attempt, my last meet, were given 3 red lights. Can you see the issue with my deadlift? Any coaching cues or auxiliary movements to set me up in execution? Any coaching cues or auxiliary movements to fix my setup and execution would be greatly appreciated. Thank you in advance. Okay. Let's see. All right. What's interesting is you actually have a similar situation with Anubis. So the underhand being this wide is definitely the first thing I'm looking at. Now, it is tricky because what you're doing, it actually reminds me of my tutorial on how to deadlift. And for you, I'd probably change a few things. Okay, yeah, there's definitely a handful of things I'd change. You're actually a rare exception of someone who starts with their hips too high. So I would consider this to be more like a stiff leg deadlift. Now, the reason being is that, look, so from this position, your shins are so vertical, it looks like you're pushing your shins away intentionally. You're pushing too much on your heels. So that's number one. So number one is push more on your forefoot. So we want to be explosive, and that's a real nuance. And I would say within recent years in powerlifting, people have really mastered this, whereas in the past, they have not. Is it used to be too much on the heels, everything back. The problem is that right now is you're so much on your heels that you're actually creating this space between you and the bar here. So this is the start of all of your problems, because not only is this a disadvantaged position anyways, we would rather meet the bar just a little bit. And again, I'll use Rondell Hunt as an example. I used him a lot last time, and I'll keep using him because he's such a good example on the deadlift. Let's go back to that 937. Let's see. You can see that now he has more leg drive than you probably ever will need because he's a little bit more than average. And I would say you're definitely way less than average. So the point is to meet somewhere in the middle. So see his space between himself and the bar. Like the bar is a little bit farther out than it needs to be. But see how he's meeting the bar, how he's giving it just enough space. Whereas with you, I would say the bar is close-ish and not kind of crazy close, but the main point is that you're so vertical with your shins that you actually have space between you and the bar. And then the bar drifts in. So to finish my point, what I was saying earlier is that this is a disadvantaged position off the floor and at lockout. And that's kind of the unfortunate thing about this, is that it's just like if you did high rep stiff leg deadlifts, a lot of times people do miss at lockout while doing that because it really hammers, basically just hammering the same limiting factor, the entire range of motion. So it's almost like by not using leg drive, you're really just fatiguing those, especially hamstrings and erectors, from the start. And then you can get kind of caught up at this midway lockout point because you're trying to overcome that starting position with the same musculature. So if you do lose position, it's going to be your back and hamstring because you're really not giving your quads a chance. So again, the solution here is definitely, so first of all, the underhand grip, I would say, is a little bit wider than I would like to see. I do think you could very slightly narrow the stance, especially for a man of your size. It can be tempting to do this, but I would actually say for smaller lifters, a lot of times it's more of an advantage to have a little bit of a wider stance relative to their frame. And for bigger lifters, the narrower you can get, kind of the better off you are. And you see this with 900-pound deadlifters and even Andy Bolton himself. Let me search Andy Bolton. Because even Andy Bolton himself, no, that's fairly wide. Because I was going to say for how big he is, I mean, he's probably literally 100 pounds more than you in his prime, because he's just a gigantic man. And you can see his stance width is the same as yours, if not slightly narrower. I think this one you could see, yeah. See how it's, he also doesn't have a great lockout, but but you almost always see these really great natural pullers basically get as narrow as they can. And I think the thing with a wider stance that could be tempting is on paper, it seems like it makes for an easier lockout because then you can use your glutes more, supposedly, all these things. But that all hinges on that start position and everything. So again, the main thing is to not rock back into it like this. It's just right here. It really is like a stiff leg deadlift. And meet the bar, push through that midfoot a little bit more like this. So let's just watch the flow and see how his forefoot must be active by the position he gets in. And by the time the bar breaks off the floor, he still does have high enough hips. So see how it's like he's not rocking back. And because of that, he's able to lock out better because, we really do want the knees to be a little bit like this, to where the knees are slightly over the bar. So the best way to think about it is that and I know this can be confusing sometimes depending on the source online, is a lot of times people exaggerate the level at which there's vertical shins because there's really not completely vertical shins. And a lot of times people have the bar too close in what they think is midfoot. So sometimes the bar needs to be slightly more forward, and then the knees are over the bar just a little bit, and then the knees move away out of the way as it drifts up so that then it's very close to being in contact with you the whole time. So you can see this here, like just see the way his knees are over the bar, and then they have to actively move out the way. So I will say here's more realistically the starting position, but still his knee is over the bar. So I think this would be a great position for you to emulate versus this. So see that difference in shin angle? That's huge. And that even applies to even your initial setup. So even though that's subtle, that's a gigantic difference in starting position. And you can also see how being as narrow as you really kind of can get can be really efficient when just looking at the width of you guys. So see, I mean, you guys are probably very similarly sized, because Rondell's a big boy. And yeah, look at how efficient that is. But then also look at as it progresses. So see, as it progresses, his knees are slowly moving away. Whereas for you, since your knees are already as back as possible, there really is no movement other than just rocking back more on your heels. And that also can play a factor at the lockout in and of itself too, just the balance factor. As you're so far on your heels that then you can kind of fall back with it. Whereas when you do use leg drive and meet the bar and use your forefoot and you want to use all aspects of your feet basically. You still do want to be on your heels. You don't want your heels off the ground, but you want your toes crunching down. So as far as cues go, I would actually actively think about curling your toes down. So you curl your toes down, and that really incentivizes you to use the quad drive just enough. And again, leg drive can be overrated on the deadlift, no doubt. I'm probably the type to least emphasize it out of anyone. But in your case, you definitely are. I mean, this is just truly a 600-pound stiff leg deadlift. It really is. So again, you can even see, like, it's a nuanced thing, but you can even see how he's more on his forefoot and you're more on your heels, just in terms of the overall flow of how you're moving. So then he gets to knee level and he's here. Let's see, you get to knee level. So see how yours, it's like swooping in on you. And that's a great sign too that you're too far on your heels, is if it's really swooping in. I'd actually say the degree in which the bar swoops in is a good measure on either extreme. Is if someone has excessive leg drive, it'll swoop in because their legs are kicking it way out, and then it has to swoop in once those knees move out the way. On the other end of the spectrum, if you're creating this space between you and the bar, it's going to swoop in just because you gave it that space and you're not on your forefoot at all. Whereas if you are really balanced on your forefoot, it's basically like jumping, to where you're going to, obviously it's not literally like jumping, but it's almost like a squat where ultimately you're staying under it the whole way. And we almost want to have that mindset of like staying under it to where it's just moving relatively straight up. Obviously it can swoop in a little bit, but for the most part, it's moving straight up and down with perfect balance. So at knee level, he's here, you're here, and then you do even see, like, even that ability to grind here. I mean, that is a make or break thing, to be able to have your knees slightly bent by here. Whereas you can see here, see how your knees are completely locked, basically, by here. And it's a very subtle difference. But see, I would say you started from a vertical shin, and because you're so far on your heels, now you're at a negative shin angle. So that, again, that is a really tough position. And that, I mean, that's something that can happen 70, 80 pound difference on your deadlift, honestly. I think you have the strength probably to deadlift 675. So see here, and this is still not ramping. Like, this is still a legal deadlift. Obviously, we don't want to overdo it to where we're ramping, but it is a legal deadlift to lock out just a little bit later, and then he locks the knees and shoulders back simultaneously. Whereas you can see here, you're already locked like that. And then what ends up happening is you actually end up having more of a temptation to ramp, because now you have nowhere else to go but trying to generate some momentum somewhere. So again, it's really a matter of patience, leg drive, knees just a little bit over the bar, and then moving away as the bar. You almost want to conform yourself to the bar, and the bar is going to be moving for the most part straight up and down, and it's almost like you're sliding around the bar. You're like throwing it up to yourself and then catching it, rather than just, stiff legging it and just brute muscling it. So hopefully this makes sense. I would actually say this is one of the more drastic ones, where this is a lot of room for growth. And like I said, I would like to see the stance and grip width a little bit narrower, but that one is less black and white than all these other points as far as the flow and the foot pressure and the shin angle at the start. So overall, this is a great deadlift. Now I'm trying to see if anything with your shoulders, if there's anything that would change with your shoulders or anything. I don't think so. The one thing that I'd be careful about is when you're locking out like this. So you mentioned getting red lights, I believe. Did you mention that? Yeah, you weren't given my second and third attempts in my last meet weren't given 3 red lights. Or I think you meant white lights. I don't know. But the main thing is that I would not compensate this kind of lockout struggle by overextending at the top. That's one common mistake that people make, is by doing this, I would even try to not have the head position up. So Brandon Lilly's actually a good example of this. And he didn't have the best deadlift form, but that's why he was good at this, because he knew the problem that he had. He actually had a kind of similar deadlift to yourself, like even style-wise. So this is an 840 single. But what he did a good job of, so he had some lack of fluidity, I would say, that I believe you can 100% fix. But what he did a good job of is that lockout, he wouldn't look up. So see how, if anything, he looks down. So if anything, down, but you don't want to overdo it to where you're actually forwardly, caving in. But you want to look down or neutral. And then you can just focus on, see how his shoulders look back and just his knees locked out as much as possible. The problem when you look up like this is that you're actually driving your back excessively back. And then what that does is actually makes it even easier to have soft knees. And when the judge is looking at your deadlift like this, they're going to only be looking at your knees almost 100% of the time. Because already your grip width is wide enough to where your shoulders are going to be easily back enough. And even if you did narrow your grip in a little bit, I think still you would be back enough. But again, it's this position. So even if I were to deadlift with this type of lockout, it'd actually be pretty hard to keep straight knees, because just think about the angle you're putting yourself in. You're basically shoving so that your thighs are really out in front of your shoulders. And then naturally, how is that not going to create some knee bend? So you want to focus on being just straight up and down. And you do a pretty good job at like tucking in your chin after here, but that defeats the purpose of what we want. So we just want that sooner. So we'd rather have that like here. And then the whole point of tucking your chin would be to just stay forward. Would be to just stay forward over it so that, again, you're not too far on those heels. So basically the whole time you're too heel dominant. I'm trying to see if there's any 770 deadlift. Let's see here. Yeah, you can see how he has some. Okay, that was actually really ramped. Okay, that sucked. So that was enough. But yeah, so as far as any cues or auxiliary movements to help your setup and execution, that's a good one. I would definitely say for you, you're probably already doing pause deadlifts, given you're on the programs at some point. I definitely think pause deadlifts for you would help. There is a drill that you could do that I'm a fan of. I'm trying to think if Shaco has this, but I was going to make a video on this for sumo. Is basically where you do 3 reps of doing the first half, to where you just leg drive it up to your knees, leg drive it up to your knees, leg drive it up to your knees. And then on that 4th rep, go all the way up and lock out. And do that obviously with a fairly sub-maximal load, like 60 to 70%, but do that on a secondary type day. And that could absolutely be super effective, especially if you did that as a drill and then did, like just stiff leg deadlifts or Romanian deadlifts, something like that. You could even replace a pause deadlift light day with just that. And that would be very effective at teaching you, because then you start thinking about leg drive and forefoot pressure without even thinking about the lockout. And then that last rep, then it flows very naturally. Because I actually had that issue with sumo deadlifts, is my lockout was a weak point. And in the end of the day, I think my lockout was a weak point because I had softer knees. So in a way, it was kind of the opposite issue as you, in the sense that it was the same with the soft knees, but I actually had too much leg drive. So really just working on refining that. It just helps in both directions. But again, it really helps with that forefoot pressure of thinking about, for me, it was thinking about locking the knees a little bit sooner on sumo. So I'd drive it up, lock the knees out, drive it up, lock the knees out, drive it up, lock the knees out, then drive it up, lock the knees out, and back. So for you, it won't be lock the knees out, but it will be get it up to those knees. And then the knees are, for the most part, moved out the way. But all those first 3 reps, I wouldn't want your shins to be negative like they are mid rep. So I'd never want them to be like here. I would want you to take it up to knee level, but by that point, your shin angle should be around like here. And then obviously at the actual start point, more forward. So again, up, 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 and then up all the way through. That's a great drill. And, obviously it should be fairly sub-max so you can do it with perfect form. And then just let your brain like really intake that. And then by the time you have that next primary day, things will start to feel much more natural, especially with that forefoot pressure. So as far as, I'd say that's probably the best cue, that in the toes down. So long term, definitely hit hamstring curls, definitely just continue to do the basics, because hitting those isolation muscles or isolation movements, for the posterior chain will be really important, just to make sure that you improve on all levels. Because as you start to use your quads more, then you want to continue to build up your hamstrings in the background. So that's the main thing, is make sure not to overdo it one way and then forget the other way. You want to always attack things in both directions, both technically, bias it towards one direction, and then accessory wise, continue to bring up the weaker point while also masking it with technique at the same time. And then that's how you get that like compounding effect and, be able to deadlift 675. But I think with that, if I were you, I would probably drop all stiff leg deadlifts off the floor if you've ever done it in any of these programs. And I'm trying to think if I would drop Romanian deadlifts. Probably not. I probably continue the Romanian deadlift because I think that's fine. But even on Romanian deadlifts, give those knees just a little bit more slack than usual. That would be my only piece of advice. And then again, hit those hamstring curls. Okay, up next we have Bakir Yezo. This is the first time I think you've ever sent anything. Issues with lockout at higher rep / weight. Not sure if positioning or weak glutes / hamstrings. All right. Okay. Your technique's pretty good. It's actually interesting. In a way, your deadlift looks similar to all these deadlifts. Actually, look similar. Okay, now it's not as good. now, not to laugh or anything, but now we got some things to work on. Okay. So you, in a way, have a similar issue to what the form check right before you, but also with a different end solution. So for you, I think we have two issues. Now, the question is, are you a strongman or are you a powerlifter? So if you're a strongman, by all means, you could continue doing what you're doing, and it's just like that's just your natural sticking point. But if you're a powerlifter, that is ramping. Obviously, again, allowed in strongman, not allowed in powerlifting. Your technique's pretty good. It's like, especially that first rep, that's pretty fine. Like, there's nothing terribly wrong with that. The main thing that you're gonna have to face is, and I know this is a tricky thing, especially when it comes to form checks, is there does reach a point where you just have to decide not to do something. Where you just have to decide to yourself that if the bar gets here, I'm not moving these knees forward, no matter what. And if I miss it, I miss it. And I think that's the point that you have to get to. And it is almost a sense of, I don't want to say maturity, and how I want to imply that you're not mature in this respect, but it is a certain sense of being locked in and being at peace with a miss. Saying that, look, it's like squatting slightly high as the reps get harder. You just have to say, I'm never going to do that. That's not even an option. And you have to have that same approach mid-lift here and just say, I'm not going to move these knees forward. Like, it is your decision to be able to do that double bend and just say, I'm never going to do it. So whatever is going to happen is going to happen. And if I end up missing, 3 reps before what I thought I would hit, then that's it. Then we just take that data and we move on. So that's the number one start point. And I know it can be tricky because it's very easy when it comes to building patterns to where it just naturally happens without much thought. But you're going to have to explicitly limit yourself on that. You just literally refuse. And a lot of times where the refusal comes is it's this lack of willingness to grind. Is you have to be willing to grind really hard, slow reps potentially. Because right now you're never going to reach a grinder because you're just going to kind of miss on a technicality because you're just trying to get it moving. Except that it may slow down, stall, and just keep pushing without changing position. So that's number one. I do notice a little bit of the scooping even on that first rep. So even here, you do scoop just a little bit. So the main thing is that continue to, again, work on that and just drive those knees back. And again, that has to do with bar speed, is that there's no reason. I mean, you could easily hit this rep no matter what. So there's no reason you'll just keep the knees here and then just pull it through. And you do for the most part, but you see that end where it wasn't slowing down enough to justify that dip forward. I mean, there is no justification for dipping forward ever, right? But so from here, see how you could have just finished that without doing that. So as far as cueing wise, I think that this is where it actually gets weirdly similar to some of these previous form checks, even though you have the opposite problem. You have too much forward knee movement. Is for you, it's at the very end, you rock back on the heels to kind of try to scoop under the lift. So instead, what I would say to you is you actually have the opposite conundrum of a lot of people. I would say you could probably be slightly more on your heels in the starting position, if anything. I mean, this isn't terrible. This might be good, but either here or slightly more like vertical shins, just very, very subtly. And that'll help you preload the hamstrings. Because right now you're having a problem in that transition point, even though you did get those quads in it. But then, so I'd say slightly more on the heels at the start and then slightly more on the forefoot at the finish. So right now you're kind of more in the forefoot, but then you're tossing it back. And then that final rock back where you just jam the knees forward, you're really just sitting back on your heels. So see, from here to here, you're just sitting back on those heels to just kind of scoop it in on a technicality. Like, no, we want to stay in that forefoot and then lift it standing straight up and down. Like you're being pulled on a string upward, without shrugging your shoulders. Still keep those shoulders nice and low. But you don't want to think about pulling it back to finish it. You want to be pulling up. And then the more you just pull up, you should be able to lock that out without that dipping forward, without the knees dipping forward. But yeah, as far as other tips, so I definitely will say due to your body type and just, this is natural as you get bigger lifters, a lot of times the bar does literally just get pushed out forward. That is a matter of fact. And then also the big thing is yes, I agree as far as the posterior chain weakness. So just continue to hammer hamstring curls, Romanian deadlifts, potentially even stiff leg deadlifts. For you, I would actually say stiff leg deadlifts would be great. And having stiff leg deadlifts where there's some space between you and the bar. So you're still having adequate amount of forefoot pressure off the floor. And you're basically just push those knees back, create some distance between you and the bar with those really vertical shins, and then just pull all the way up with 100% strict technique. If you do that with even a decently controlled eccentric, that will build up your posterior chain strength like no other. And that really build in the habit well, is because you need to practice the patience of a long range of motion and never allowing yourself to have your knees shift forward. In fact, I believe Chad Wesley Smith, someone like that, has an invention where basically it's something that kind of blocks your shins and it makes you pull up with your shins not even being allowed to move forward. And I think that would be, it's a kind of a theoretical thing, but that would actually be really nice for you. But actually, Alan Thrall has a video doing that. But yeah, as far as the final point that I wanted to mention to you is baby powder. That's the big thing. And now I know it could be tough with whatever gym you're in. Maybe they don't want baby powder being thrown around. But you're at a point where you're not going to be able to see what your real strength is without baby powder on your thighs. So I would actually say use baby powder. And if this gym doesn't let you use it, find a gym that does. I think it's that important for someone like you where this is just always going to be a factor. And baby powder single-handedly made me deadlift 700 when otherwise I would not have. I very clearly saw, I would say, at least a 12.5 kilogram difference. Now, final point is one thing that I think is worth considering. So for you, I would actually not do Romanian deadlifts in favor of stiff leg deadlifts off the floor. And then the second point is I would actually consider doing block pulls with bumpers on each side, with 2 bumper plates on each side as far as to elevate the weight, and then just have really strict technique and basically have your shoulders over the bar and then just lift it really strictly. Don't jam your knees to really artificially get a bunch of leg drive. And that single-handedly can be effective. I think partial block pulls are an underrated tool, especially for someone like yourself, where you can slowly start to get stronger and stronger at it, and then eventually you'll probably be stronger than your main lift while still keeping strict form. And then that's when you've completely conquered this. Because off the floor, you could probably get, 20 kilograms more off the floor for 3 reps. You probably do 280 for 3 if you just had to pop it up to your knees. So the moment you could then block pull 280 for 3 while keeping strict form, then you could go back to the floor and almost certainly hit it after one cycle of adaptation. So that's something to consider. And if you really did want to, honestly, if you wanted to get into an experimental phase, you could honestly have block pull be a primary lift if you wanted to. I wouldn't be opposed to that. That'd be a little bit conjugate minded, but you could run, let's say, a 4-week phase of the 8-week program, do the first 4 weeks, have the primary day be block pulls, something like that. And then, the last 4 weeks, switch it up. Because the only thing is you wouldn't want to go block pulls for too long, radically long. Or actually the 3-rep max program, something like that. Something where you're doing triples or, I know 3-rep max program you're actually doing volume. So I actually would not do it for really, really high volume. I'd do it for moderate volume type of program. So I'd say, something like the 10-rep max phase where the deadlift is more secondary. I'd say that would be a great example where you could push block pulls in place of snatch grip deadlifts. That would actually be a really, really great way to use it. Or you could even if you really, really wanted to, you could do block pulls on both days. So something like that where you're just really pushing block pulls harder and ultimately trying to get that load up. If this has been a very long-term issue, which I suspect it probably has been because the way you're moving, this is going to need really long-term unwinding. So hopefully that was helpful and not throwing too much at you. But yeah, I would say, I think that's a real valid issue. And I don't think it's just specific to the reps or weight or just specific to one thing. I do think it is. It's related to weak hamstrings, I'll say. Probably more so than glutes. I don't suspect you have weak glutes. I think it's a little bit more hamstrings, but again, also the size and the baby powder and all of that. So yeah, hopefully this helps. And I do think it's a very underrated thing that block pulls are actually efficient or effective. They actually really are useful tools. So again, block pulls, hamstring curls, and stiff leg deadlifts off the floor. What I don't recommend for you are Romanian deadlifts. I would not recommend pause deadlifts, actually. And yeah, and I wouldn't recommend glute isolations for you. I don't think that's quite the limiting factor because glutes really are involved throughout the whole lift. They are also a pressing movement, and the way you start off the floor, I think you used your glutes plenty. It's really that final, especially that really, really final piece. Your glutes are actually pretty disadvantaged. That's really specific to hamstrings. So overall, excellent work. And yeah, definitely send in another form check, especially if you do those partial, if you do those block pulls or if you do stiff leg deadlifts, definitely send that into the next form check. Okay, up next we have Sam Pratt. Sam says, "Hi Johnny, congratulations on the wedding. Hope it was an amazing day." It was. Thank you very much. And I really appreciate you guys for saying that. Last time you talked about inconsistency in my setup. So I've been working on the walkout and trying not to let the weight roll back in between reps. After working on not letting the plate spin on the way down, I think I did much better on the set of 6, or also working on that. Okay, let's check it out. New max of 480. Let me turn my audio down. All right. Good. That's pretty good. Yeah, like you definitely did a pretty good job at not allowing it to roll. It did a little bit, but not crazy. All right, let's see here. Yeah, you're definitely starting more forward now. Let's see if it continues across reps. Yeah, that was very natural. And you have excellent depth. I mean, this looks phenomenal. So yeah, I may check back with your original, because I remember a while back, but it would help for me to see it. I remember, I believe it was in the exact same rack. I remember you used to stand up too straight. Okay, a little bit of a corkscrew. That's really good. Yeah, let me check really quickly. Okay, so it was, yeah, let's go back here and check. Oh yeah, I see it there. Yeah, it looks to me like you're just doing a better job at leaning more forward now, a little bit less, because here you almost have a little bit of a high bar mindset, just a little bit, and therefore you kind of like cave when it gets hard. Whereas here, like, yeah, I mean, this looks good. Like I'm trying to think with the 480 max, if there's anything I would tweak. I'm not sure. I think probably the only thing from here is what I would adjust very slightly, and it's a little bit subjective, but I do think in your case it's worth doing, is I would try to get that tempo down faster now. So now you have all of the pieces as far as you're starting out more forward and you're a little bit more in your hips than before. Yeah, you do a much better job here than that other clip, and it sets up for this good stick, grind point. But now I would like to see that descent just down faster. And that really is the final piece of the pie, is as you control, because especially here's fine, but right here, like, yeah, I think the way you went down is just a little hesitant. I think you could literally double or at least 1.5 times the speed. Actually, let's see that. Let's see 2 times speed. I can fast forward on YouTube Shorts. Okay, let's see. 2 times speed. Yeah, see? Literally, that looks like a normal squat. That's funny. Like everything else looked, like fast forwarded, except then the descent just looked totally normal. And I think that exposes just how slow that was. So that's the one thing that I would just mentally work on now moving forward. And that's a great thing. Like that's exactly the position you want to be in, is you want to slow things down as you start to figure it out, get into that position that you're going to be able to get into on a 100% 1 rep max on the ascent, not just the descent. Get into that sustainable position through a 100% grinder. And then now you get the luxury of being able to attack it. But yeah, other than that, I wouldn't say there's really anything that I would change. But luckily that's one thing where I think if you do that, just descend a little faster while still keeping your shins at that angle. Don't go down faster and then all of a sudden let your quads really get too far forward and get a little too upright. Don't let yourself do that. As long as you stay forward in that and stay in your hips, then go down faster. I think you're easily adding 5 to 10 kilograms on your squat. Just overnight, I think you would hit 490 immediately. Okay, on the deadlift, I've been working on trying not to squat in the bottom quite as much, and my max is better on this. Also stopped doing touch and go reps and didn't get any video of that. Still feeling like I'm having a hard time filling the belt when I don't brace at the top, which I agree also didn't work great last time, or wasn't working great last time. Just tough time feeling a good brace in general, I guess. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, because I remember you used to do touch and go reps. That's pretty good. Yeah, I think the big thing, I mean, the biggest thing is I wouldn't worry too much about your brace moving forward, because I think one of the reasons why your brace feels weird is because you're trying to be so erect, so rigid, and that naturally coincides with someone who does tend to have too much leg drive. And I think that's connected, is when you're really trying to brace super hard, it's like, yeah, we do want to brace on the deadlift, but ultimately your brace should feel worse on a deadlift than a squat. And I think that's the thing that you're kind of slowly going to have to accept, because that is ultimately the truth, is that we want to brace, but we don't want to brace so rigid, so perfect that then all of a sudden you're like this plank that's like perfectly stiff. Because like ultimately the deadlift does require some level of movement, a little bit of laxity, a little bit of slack in the system getting pulled out. You know, because this position, it's not going to be like you're not perfectly, everything's exact. You know, it is an athletic movement where you want to be long, and you want to be, the nuances, you want to be very, very slightly loose on a 1 rep max deadlift. And I think that's the tricky part. So I do think that you'll be fine. I mean, again, obviously you do want to brace really hard and all that still, but I think it's going to be a symptom, not a cause. And I think it's a symptom of trying to have a little bit too much leg drive and trying to be a little too stiff, as opposed to, you know, this position you end up being in, which is really good. And I think this also coincides with reps. Now, obviously, there's some truth to what you're saying, that, yeah, as far as reps, it can be harder to get your brace for very real reasons. However, another part of it is that on lighter rep work sometimes and higher rep work, sometimes it's just the load itself being lighter, you know, doing the rep work. It can be more tempting to over brace on that first rep, and then as the weight gets harder, you start to lose your brace because you're getting into a more efficient position. So it can be a little bit, you know, contradictory to what you would think. I guess that's the best way to put it. So again, that's why, but that can be a good thing. It's like we do want to be just a little bit loose with the deadlift as well. But yeah, the biggest thing that I would look for in your deadlift is just this knee point. So I strongly recommend, especially if you're going to have a singlet, get some baby powder on those thighs. You know, it's similar to a form check earlier today. Strongly recommend, because right here, I would say this I think would be called for ramping. I do, in a meet. This is too much of a forward knee position. So be more patient with that. And you didn't ultimately miss the lift at any point. So I think you could have hit this, but it'd be very hard because it is different when you're not ramping. But right here, your knees should not go any more forward, and if anything, should start to lock out a little bit, but instead you're kind of dipping under it. So don't let yourself dip under it. Don't let yourself get on those heels. Stay on your forefoot, on your midfoot, and then just think about pulling yourself straight up and down. Not that you're trying to wedge under the bar, because the moment you think like that and force those shoulders back prematurely, you're going to have a little bit of that ramping. And most importantly, similar to what I've told someone earlier, is like you just have to accept that you're never going to ramp. Never let your knees, dip forward like this, even if it means missing the weight. Just let yourself miss it then. Just say, I'm going to keep these knees here no matter what, and whatever happens, happens. So like I've said earlier to the other lifters, like for you at this point, I think the technical aspects, I think you're in a pretty good spot. I mean, yeah, I'd still say you're maybe on the edge of a little too much leg drive still. But like you said, ultimately when the bar comes off the floor, you're in a pretty decent, pretty good position, I would say. I think from here, the key point is going to be anytime there's a Romanian deadlift slot, do stiff leg deadlifts off the floor, where you're really creating some space between your shins and the bar by having the shins completely vertical. That will really help you, especially with the lockout. And it'll help you naturally bias over time to your starting position, just continuing to get more and more high-hipped just a little bit. You won't even have to consciously think about it. Right now, I think in terms of what you're consciously thinking about, you're doing a pretty good job. I think you're doing a great job at the starting position, great job on the brace for 1 rep set. But I think that top half is the only part where you just have to like manually override your tendency. and just think straight up and down. But then again, on the stiff leg deadlifts, that will subtly fix the starting position even more without you having to think anything of it. So don't even mentally try to work on that, but do the stiff leg deadlifts off the floor. In a very long term, I would not be opposed to someone like you doing block pulls, similar to what I said earlier to another lifter. Is like, at the end of the day, you could do a block pull wave where if it turns out that you do miss at lockout in a 1 rep max, then that could be worth it. And I personally am actually a fan of block pulls with strict form, to where you're not just jamming your knees forward, to create a bunch of leg drive, defeating the purpose. Just staying strict with it and getting your shoulders over the bar and just locking it out smoothly, like the top half of a deadlift with no ramping at all. I'm actually a fan of that being kind of a primary lift. Whereas a lot of people, would do it as a secondary. The reason why I like it as a primary is that then you can just keep hammering it over and over again and just don't do any off the floor deadlifts, so that you give yourself time to just hammer that. But again, that's only if you're going to give yourself time to just master that. And that's, that would be basically kind of going off program and just saying, look, I'm just going to manually, substitute this and do, just sets with block pulls and just, do, I personally always like doing sets of 5, but you could just do as a primary day. Just instead of doing a 4x4 in competition deadlift with the top set of 4, just say, hey, I'm going to do block pulls for this 4-week wave. I do think that's a valid thing, and then keep the secondary day however you want it. You could still do pause deadlifts off the floor and just do no competition deadlifts off the floor. Something like that. Something to give yourself a little bit of a mental break. But again, that's only if that's that would be the more drastic solution. Whereas the moderate solution is just the stiff leg deadlifts and then that mental cue at the top, and then also the baby powder on the thighs. So that was a really good one. So good luck and excellent squat. I'd say excellent squat and good deadlift. That's I like ranking these sometimes. Okay, up next we have Clifton Win. Clifton says, here are week 3 singles, non-short. Excellent. We love that. We love some non-shorts over here. I really do appreciate that, because I don't prefer the YouTube shorts. I don't mind them, but it's a lot easier for me to handle the full videos. Okay, so you say bench 255 at RP 8 to 8.5. Okay, some notes. I'll just go over the bench first so that I know what I'm looking at. Okay, you say good bar speed, RP 8, or am I undershooting? Okay, I will say before I even get into this, if in doubt, I do like the tendency to undershoot. I mentioned that in the programs, so very likely that's fine. Some days my belt, okay, let's see, bench. Bench. Okay, not really too many notes. Thank you as always, the best YouTuber in the fitness space. Thank you very much. Okay, let's look at your bench here. Yeah, I probably took a little too long on the first couple form checks, so I'm going to try to get like closer to 15 minutes each on these. So this video isn't atrociously long, but okay. Very good. Your bench is very good. I think that bench is especially given your moderate bencher overall. Like, I'm assuming you don't want to right now dial in a crazy arch. Because I'd say if you did want to, increase the arch, you definitely could do some things to get a little bit more. So if you are competing, which I'll check here, if you are a competitive powerlifter, I think you could dial some things in. You didn't hint at whether you are or are not. So I'd say if you're training for general strength and maybe interested in powerlifting, but not interested in like a super short range of motion bench, I'd say this is perfect. Because I really like the elbow flare. That level of sync, I think, is very effective. And this ultimately is very aligned in a great pause duration. I would say that's very accurate. That's right at RP 8 to 8.5. Now, I can't see the bar path as far as if you're pressing up and back. I presume you are. I can't tell from this angle. It does look like your butt is on the bench. It's very slightly close. So the only 2 tips I'll give is that if you do want to increase your arch for the sake of just reducing range of motion, I would do 3 things. One is I would reduce the amount of sync, because that just effectively shortens the range of motion. Second point is I would actually relax the glutes, because by relaxing the glutes, you can actually get into more of an anterior pelvic tilt, which is actually good when it comes to arching. So that can be counterintuitive because it's kind of natural to drive with the glutes, and you definitely are driving with the glutes, as you see here. So if you just had a completely dead, relaxed glutes, that's what Sean Noriega and those extreme, archers do. And then the last point would be to use your feet more aggressively, because right now your feet are just kind of dangling. So it'd be to really jam those feet so that you either jam it under you or jam it more in front, but so that you're pushing 100% with your quads. So let's imagine for yourself, it'd be keep the foot position relatively similar here, if anything more forward, but really push hard with those quads. So you're driving your traps back so that then you're really pinning, and effectively just think about shortening the distance between your hips and your shoulders by just jamming horizontally with your leg drive. So that would be if you do want to reduce the range of motion as much as possible. But, that's not everyone's cup of tea. So I'd say for general strength, 100% fine. For competitive powerlifting, I think you could get, probably 20% of that range of motion cut off completely. And it is a little bit harder in commercial gym setups, though, I will say. Okay, let's look at the squat. Okay, so first of all, the big thing is, I know you're in a tough rack position, but I definitely would prefer less of a walkout. So 1, 2, 3, 4, kind of 5-ish, 4 to 5-ish. I would prefer a 3-step walkout. So again, I know this is a really hard setup in this type of gym. I do think long-term it's worth it to not go to a gym like this. Like to truly just say, look, I'm just going to pick an alternative. Because even some of these like Planet Fitness gyms now are offering more and more options. This looks like, I don't know if this is Anytime Fitness or Gold's Gym. Kind of looks like Gold's Gym with the coloring, but Gold's Gyms usually are better now. But yeah, even with this setup, I still think you can get this down a little bit. And the key is to just make it a bigger step first. Go 1. I would just make that back step just like more like here. Yeah, it's tough though. But at least reduce it by 1 step. But okay, so let's get into the squat. Ooh, you got a lot of things going on your squat. So the biggest thing to me that stands out is you're a low bar squatter with a high bar tendency. So I'm not a big fan of that degree of scooping forward. Now, who it reminds me of is Sawyer Klatt. So you have exactly Sawyer's type of squat. So let's see. So you remind me a lot of Sawyer because look at his knee position. Less so on his early videos and more on his recent ones. So see how he goes here and then kind of goes back, then dips forward. And he kind of always does that. He always does this like dip forward. But one thing that you'll notice is his knees do go back and then forward. So it's first of all, it's a unique squat style anyways. And yours kind of goes back a little bit. But my main issue is when yours goes forward, it's really radically forward. So you kind of dump it and then here. This is a very extremely forward position. I don't think that this is maximally efficient. I just don't. So that being said, let me look at what you're saying. Some days my beltless squats feel stronger depending on my GPP. Last week I hit 375 with a belt at RP7. This week beltless felt way better. Same applies to deadlifts. Should I stick to wearing a belt? Okay, wear a belt. Now this I think is all connected. I think it's because of this. Because you're in such an upright position that you really are not going to get a lot of a belt because look, you're both kind of allowing a little bit of laxity in your back where you're a little bit forward. And then also that is just an extremely forward knee position and you're crashing into the hole. So I strongly do recommend a belt. Now what's the setup here? What program are you on? You said you're on my week 3 singles. Okay. I guess they're just beltless because you just didn't bring a belt. Okay. Yeah, I definitely would not listen to how you feel on this because ultimately, and this is always the nuance, is that there are a lot of things where it is worth listening how you feel. And then there are some things where you just say, look, ultimately, and this is no disrespect, of course, you are not an elite, world-class, world record holder lifter. And all of them squat with a belt. All of them. Just 100%. Everybody I've ever known who's trained more than 10 years, everybody lifts more with the belt. And on the squat. That's not true on sumo deadlifts. So there are some exceptions like Nick Manders, who has a very strong sumo deadlift, and sumo deadlift's like 800. And he, because of his particular style where it's very upright, which again connects to the theme that we're talking about here, and he has a very wide sumo, things can change. And that's for him to find out. And then we look at that and go, oh, okay, so there are some exceptions. But it's never for someone within the first 5 years, 10 years. Yeah, I mean, maybe if you're around year 10 or 9. But I'd say anybody who's squatting, under 500 pounds, under 550, it's like you really should not even be thinking in terms of those judgments. And there are some times where it's just better to just say, what's the normal thing? I'm probably not the exception. And for this, like I said, I mean, literally, I don't know of one. So I'd say it is a rare thing, though, or it's a not rare thing. It's a nuanced thing because there are some issues where I don't say that. So there are some issues where it's like, okay, yeah, maybe 10% of people are stronger on bench without wrist wraps. Something like that, even though objectively it would seemingly be beneficial to have them. So that's a good example of one where I'm like, all right. But when it's 0%, then it's like, no, we just got to figure this out, how to use that belt more effectively. And ultimately, using a belt is a skill. So the biggest thing that I would look to with this low bar squat is the way you go down, you actually pick up speed going into the hole, which I don't like. So I would not pick up speed. I'd do a couple things. One is you're actually a rare case of I would like to see a little bit more extension in the back. Now, I can't tell for sure because you have a pretty loose shirt on. But to me, it almost looks like your upper back's pretty neutral, but your lower back might actually be slightly tucked. Because it looks almost like you're trying not to poke your butt out too much, but you're almost doing too good of a job at that. So I'd actually just a little bit poke your butt out just a little bit more. Because like, look here, like this, again, it's hard to tell with the baggy shirt, but it looks like you're, if anything, flexed with your lower back. And ultimately, one thing that can be a benefit, especially to smaller lifters, is by having some extension, it can actually help cut off that bottom position in a more hip dominant way. So, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of a Japanese squatter. Now, he's not going to have a similar squat to you. But, yeah, he's a very different type of squatter than you as far as his stance width, and it's super low bar. But you can see, look how extended he gets into the hole. So now, again, this is more extended than I want you to be. But you see how that cuts you off at the hips. So that then you can tell this is a lifter where his belt gives him an insane amount of leverage. So with you, I would like to see, you could keep the stance width the same and everything. I'd just like to see a little bit more of that extension so that then you feel it in the front of your hips. You almost feel it in your hip flexors. That's a really good sign that you're squatting with good tightness. But again, I think you're doing the opposite. And then also tempo-wise, what I'm not liking is that you start out at a pretty moderate pace, but you actually pick up speed going into the hole. So if anything, ideally, it'd probably be a pretty neutral, the whole time, same speed. And I think you could just keep the speed that you start with. I think that's a pretty good speed. I would say that or slower, though. So I'd say you could go this speed and then just, cut it. But it's you're going that speed and then kind of picking up pace and dumping. So I'd say that speed or slightly slower and a uniform speed in that bottom position. Definitely not picking up speed going into the hole. Because, again, I think this depth is... Yeah, you could cut it short by about half an inch to maybe a full inch and still be at depth. And for low bar, we don't want to, just go totally ass to grass. But I mean, it's not like you're crazy too deep, but you're just a little, you probably cut right here and instead you're there. So see how you went that little bit more down and see this position that you get in. This is a crazy position. Like this is an interesting position. And I think this is where being beltless I would definitely like you to send in another form check the next time I open them up and send in a front view because something interesting is going on from the front because this is a very, very bent over squat. And then you obviously save it by then going super upright. So because of that amount of flexion and extension in your back that I think is going on, again, I can't know for sure because of the bagginess of the shirt, but then especially the way that you shift positions around, I could definitely see how with the belt, you might just lose it forward. For sure. Like I could easily imagine that because right now it's almost like mobility is more beneficial than rigidity. But ultimately, when it comes to the squat, rigidity should be the most effective thing for your torso and everything else should be relatively consistent in mirroring the centric and concentric as far as up and down, the negative and positive of the lift in your lower body. So we basically want it to be more like a leg press. Right now, it's almost like a clean and jerk, the way you're really flowing with it and moving around a lot. And there's a lot of moving parts. Yeah, this is a very, extreme position, honestly. So I would definitely need to see that front view. Yeah, that's an interesting one. But that again is why you'd benefit from not dumping those knees forward, because you get more control. And the thing that we're gonna have to find out is what is your strongest knee position. So if your strongest knee position is a little bit more forward, then why do we ever see that kickback of the hips? So why do your hips go from here to here if this isn't even a strong position? So I think that would be the question, is when it does that, is that just due to cueing or is that due to a muscular issue? Because ultimately we have to decide, do we want your knees a little bit further back or further forward to play to your strength? And we're going to have to pick one. And that's where I think we're just going to need that front view. But we're going to have to pick one because we don't want the knees changing this much throughout the rep. And if it definitely, I mean, either way, if we figure out one that you can then emulate the whole time, then the belt will be an absolute asset without a doubt. Also, I'm using a 10 millimeter leather belt. All right. I think that's a fine belt. I tend to recommend that actually as my number one recommendation. Okay, now let's go to the deadlift. Recently swapped to hook grip out of the blue. Concern is my aggressive perk style slack pull to get my hook grip set up. Yeah, you know, Perkins probably has somewhat of a squat style like you're doing. Let's see. But even then, probably definitely not as extreme. So you see, yeah, actually this is pretty good. So you see how he still does a little bit of that. And I think also a key point that you're probably going to have to do is that you see how much more stable he is? You're probably going to have to focus on speed a little bit less. Now, again, sometimes I assume a lot just based on names that someone mentions. But if you watch Perkins and you dump like that in the bottom position, I'm just guessing that you're trying to blow up a lot of submaximal load the way that, you know, Perkins does, where he just, you know, lifts 485 and just blows it up like crazy for a set of 4, like super fast. And the problem is that if you aren't careful, you can start to lose position by always trying to be faster. And that could be the temptation to dip those knees forward so that you just finish it even faster, even if that's a position that won't be able to grind as well in 100% one rep max. So that being said, let's get back to the deadlift. You said the slack pull to set my hook grip up will get red lighted since the plates leave off the floor. You're concerned about that? Let's see. Okay, so you are planning on competing. So yeah, I do think then that bench can definitely be refined quite a bit. So if you are going to send in another form check, which I definitely recommend, send in bench from a more side view, so the side diagonal view, so I can see it touch your chest and just see the bar path a little bit. Not direct side, but diagonal. As far as the deadlift goes, let's see. Yeah, I mean, I just wouldn't recommend doing that. Like, I do see what you're doing. I mean, I think you could just do it lighter. I mean, realistically, at a certain load, you'll be able to do that, you know, a certain strength level. I just wouldn't worry too much about it at this point because it's definitely one of those things where a guy like Austin Perkins very unlikely was doing that at the start of his lifting career. And it's one of those things that people learn, you know, later on. So it's kind of similar to the belt one, but this one is definitely more on the subjective side, whereas the belt one was objective. But yeah, so if I were you, I would just stop doing that. Like, I would just pull a lot lighter than just to get your lats tight or something. You don't need to like pop the weight off to feel it and all that stuff. But as far as your deadlift, yeah, I think it does confirm what I was thinking about with the squat, is that you do have a little bit of this rounded back. You have a very rounded lower back. And that's something we don't want to see totally. So we definitely want to refine that. I would like to see you, again, arch your back just a little bit. And I know that's contrary to what you're going to hear a lot because so many people are coming from the opposite end of the spectrum. So many people overextend and need to be taught to allow themselves to have some more neutral posterior pelvic tilt as opposed to anterior pelvic tilt. But you already have posterior pelvic tilt, meaning your hips are dipped under you. So at this point, you're like, I don't know if you'll be able to see. I mean, you're like totally caved forward to where, I mean, you just definitely need to and can get that more neutral because you're not neutral at any point, really. So you're starting out like this, like you're already not neutral. Why are these videos constantly coming up? You're already not neutral here. And then most importantly is your upper back's actually pretty neutral. So that's why, if anything, I would like to see this displaced. So if you are going to round something, round your upper back just a little bit more while then poking your lower back out. So again, let me see if you can see here. So if anything, let this come forward, but then poke this out while this is forward. So see, you're like this and then this. I would rather see this and then this. And then that's going to really get you in a good position. And I think Sean Noriega, he has some good, depending on the load, some sumo deadlifts he does get just rounded overall, but some now especially he does a good job at actually having pretty good neutrality in his lower back, but then his scapula is forward, which is ultimately what you want, and that's really efficient. So you're kind of getting the worst of both worlds in a sense by having that upper back be pretty neutral. My goodness, how many times is it going to try to... I can't even hit spacebar without that coming up. That's crazy. Oh my goodness, this is pissing me off. Okay, it's because I'm not in the browser. All right. But yeah, so as far as your start position, as far as the balance of it, it's pretty good. So the balance is good. The speed is good. Again, I don't mind speed on the deadlift. So again, you lift very fast across the board, which can be a blessing and a curse. I think for the deadlift, keep that up. That's very good because you ultimately can't go wrong as long as you're staying strict with form. It's just easier to keep that. You're just lifting only the concentric. So it's just straight up as much as you can. Whereas the squat, it really is like it actually can be a problem to lift too fast, well, especially with submaximal load. So, but again, to get a more specific point, definitely extend this. Definitely extend this. You can extend this while still embracing the high hips, embracing those glutes, because right now your glutes are taken out of it too much. And I can definitely tell your lockout, while it's good, it definitely will be stronger if we do get those glutes involved. And most importantly, it just will be a more consistent, trainable lift, because this is just it's going to be hard to build up your lower erectors this strongly. Whereas your upper back, you have more muscular support. You both have your erectors, but then you have your lats, you have your rhomboids, you have your traps, all of that working in concert. Whereas here, it's like, it just, you're going to hit a wall most likely. Most people do, where they're stronger initially like this, but it's just much harder to pack muscle here, specifically on your lower erectors, than it is on your upper back and glutes. So that'll be the number one thing. And then also, when you do have a little bit more of a flatter back conventional deadlift, it will help the squat transfer over more directly. Okay, so I still don't know yet if the plates leave for the 1 rep max is a problem or not. So again, I would say it is. I think when in doubt, especially when you're assuming you're somewhat earlier in your powerlifting journey, you just don't want to do anything that's going to stress you out. So if you do it like this and you go into meet, it's just going to be something on your mind. And at the end of the day, more problems happen than you expect. So I would say just scrap that idea. You don't need it. And if you really had to, you could just do it at 30% exertion or something like that. Just dial it down massively to where you just know you're not going to actually pop it off the ground. Or you could just literally just not do it. Like, you just don't have to do it at all. So that would be my recommendation, just to keep things a little bit simpler. Okay, so up next we have Henry Tam. He says, "Hello, Johnny. Here's the link. Here's a series of couple of training clips from week 5, day 1+2 on the version 2 of the 6-week program. Things I struggle with the squat." We'll just look at the squat first. "Minor hip flexor pain that might be caused by form or affecting form. Keeping the bar path straight right after hitting the lower back, getting fatigued despite squatting high bar. Let me know if there's some global issues that may fix all 3 simultaneously." Let's see. Okay. Okay, you have an interesting squat style. I mean, first of all, your squat looks extremely good, to be honest. It looks really, really good. So, I mean, I'm liking your squat. My gut instinct is, I don't think it's likely that these issues are from your technique, except for the hip flexor possibly. So the hip flexor could possibly be because you do have I really like this style of squat. It's a very efficient squat, but I could see it being a little bit more hip dominant than most high bars, especially relative to this stance width. So what I would probably do if I were you is I would put a little bit more pressure on your forefoot. You're probably a little bit far back on your heels by the way that your squat's almost like too picture perfect in a sense. And that definitely is likely connected to the bar path issue that you mentioned. I actually didn't even think about that, and that's exactly the typical cause. Now, again, your bar path is pretty good. It's really not that bad, but you can see the bars rolling up a little bit. So also, I do think, even for a high bar squat, especially at that sticking point, it was getting a little extreme as far as it looked like it rolled up. So here, I would consider just bringing this down just a little bit. So you want it on your traps, obviously. But I think this is rolling so far forward, it's almost on your neck. It's like in between your neck and the traps. So just make sure it's on that trap meat and not like so far in front of it that it's basically getting into your cervical spine. So that would be the number one thing in that, because of just how easy that is to just make sure it's slightly lower while still staying high bar. Because sometimes that can throw you forward, and because of the leverage difference, that can actually make it more pressure on your lower back. Now, that being said, my gut feeling is the lower back fatigue is just the program itself. It's just like, as long as you're not snapping your back and you just feel sore with your back because you're squatting and deadlifting hard, that's totally fine. Like, it's a fine line between lower back fatigue that's just normal muscular adaptation and lower back fatigue that's structural, damage potentially. And with the way your technique is, you do a very good job at holding position to where I suspect it's just your erectors are working hard. A lot of times, if anything, you're the actual type of lifter where probably extending a little bit less in your back would actually help when it comes to that, because you're probably just tight and you're just feeling that muscular fatigue, like I said, after, and potentially a little bit the next day, but probably not really in the next week or so. But now, again, with the hip flexor point, I do think that's a more nuanced one. So again, what I would do if I were you would be, I like this style squat, but I would do one of two things. Now, this is where you're going to have a choice. Either keep the stance width exactly the same, but get just a little bit more in your forefoot and allow slightly more forward knee travel. Because, again, this is such a picture-perfect squat. It's almost a little too picture-perfect to where I think it would likely be you're probably slightly behind midfoot, and you probably benefit from shifting the system just a little bit more forward. So again, you can put more pressure actively on the forefoot, not just on the heel. And then that may require the knees going from here to like just here, just a little bit more forward. And I think you'll get more explosive, and it'll be like you're jumping up, and that will absolutely relieve the hip flexor discomfort you're mentioning. Now, the other alternative would be to still keep that principle of the forefoot, but widen the stance width just 1.5 inches on each side. And then you could do the same principle of being a little bit more forward and everything, but then your actual shin angle would not likely change at all. Now, I tend to lean towards the first one for you because, with the widening of the stance width, it's going to, if anything, make your hip flexors, it's going to feel different, but you'll definitely be exposing your hip flexors to more of an emphasis. And the first option when it comes to lifters of your size, and it tends to be that Asian lifters tend to have a narrower stance on squat and wider on the deadlift. Not all, but some. It tends to be the case that lifters with this type of build with like a little bit shorter femurs relative to the length of your torso and everything tends to be beneficial to just accept that and just really get into your quads and just really get explosive. But again, that requires that forefoot pressure. And you see it a little bit. I see glimpses of it looking really natural here. But I think that just a little bit of that first clip, and just in general, I think you're just a little bit back on the heels more than you have to be. And that's why that transition point is unnatural. But then after that transition point, then it probably feels really natural, because then you start to get, it's almost like you're getting off your heels, then back into your just overall feet after you come up off that first inch or two of the rebound. But with a 1 rep max, you just miss the lift before you even could readjust. So again, just stay in that forefoot the whole time. And even just think about your toes being pushed down. So curling your toes down, even from the start, and then staying in those toes even. And that can be counterintuitive to some people. That's why there was a Coach Ma, Jiping Ma, something like that. He used to have a drill way back in the day. This is probably like an 8-year-old Instagram post at this point, where he'd actually elevate the forefoot to really emphasize that for his weightlifters. So Yeah, I think that's definitely the number one. Like all of those kind of work together to hopefully solve all three. But yeah, I do think you can solve all three simultaneously. Other than the fact that some of the fatigue is also going to be a little bit normal. But yeah, the main thing is you definitely don't want to fight to be on the heels more, and you definitely don't want to fight to be extended more. Like you're plenty extended. I don't think you're crazy overextended, but especially mid-lift, you could probably use being slightly less extended and just be a little bit more neutral and just accept that position. Because ultimately, you just need to get to a point where you accept the position rather than fighting it. Like right now, your high bar is a little bit too high. Your extension's a little bit too extended. So if you could just get that high bar on the meat, and then also by not forcing extension as much on the way up, it won't roll forward as much. So then you'll just be able to tuck your ribs in just a little bit more, and then just go straight down and up, and then it's just resting on the meat of your traps. That's definitely what we want to get to. I would say of all lifters, that would be a good example for you would be Calgary Barbell, because he does a good job at not fighting the weight when it comes to the torso position. Okay. Hopefully that was understandable and applicable. Bench, recovering from, I don't know why I deleted that. Let me get back to it. You said bench, recovering from some front delt pain. The mid-range is always the toughest. Would appreciate any form optimizations to blow up my bench strength, which is relatively my weakest lift compared to squats and deadlifts. Okay, let's see here. All right. Let's see. Primer single one. Well, definitely you're slightly overtucked, which is a very common thing, almost universal. And it's not crazy, but it is. Oh yeah, it's there. So really you're going to have two main things okay, let's see your top single first. So you're actually doing something in the opposite order that I like to see, is that you are unracking, and then you unrack, fairly tight. This is fine. Here's what I don't like is your elbows are already plenty in. So the inward of your elbows is the external rotation at your shoulder, right? And this is already fine. And then if anything, I would like to see more internal rotation from this point. But instead you do the opposite. So you double down. By bracing like that, you're also externally rotating the shoulders excessively. So what I would like you to do would be to unrack it, be tight with external rotation of shoulder, arch, then the last movement is this. Then if anything, do that. Now, obviously not everyone needs to do everything super segmented, but I would rather you arch, and you can still have that's why that initial external rotation you're in is fine, and that's enough. I wouldn't go beyond that. So this point is fine, and then you could actively get that chest up and still actively dynamically extend your spine within this position without increasing the external rotation. And like I said, then actually increase the internal rotation. Because then once you get to pressing, you want to have as much internal rotation as is tolerable given your width. So here your elbows, you could just see now that you're pressing, see how your elbows are much more flared out. And some people are a fan of having a different eccentric versus concentric on the bench press, but I'm not a fan of that for wider grip bench. If you're a narrow grip bencher, yeah, you can tuck in and then kind of corkscrew out more, but that's more tolerable because ultimately even the bottom position is still relatively aligned because of how narrow that grip is. But for you, like see how here, look at the elbow of your arm. That's just a massive misalignment, and that's just going to bleed out in terms of strength. That's why you kind of dump it when you get into your chest, because as you're coming down with it, like you really have no ability to have optimal tension on the chest at this point. That's why you're basically bringing it down totally with your lats doing that, which, obviously there's some upside in that, but we don't want to just let it just sink down and really not have that pec tension. And that's the thing is ultimately with a raw bench press, it really is pretty similar on the way down and on the way up. And you really do want to have tension on the pecs on the way down. And I think that's a very counterintuitive thing. There was let's see, Swedish bench press. I'll just guess. This is actually interesting. I've never seen this video, but because it's a Swedish bench presser, I'm going to assume he's going to do it right. Let's see. Is he flared out? Yes, he is. Perfect. Okay, see, this is a perfect example. So see, this is a massive bench press. I knew it. I knew I'd believe in the Swedish technicians. So this is a 200 kilogram. That's crazy. 200 kilogram bench press at 18, at 72 kilograms. But you see, this is exactly what I'm talking about, where he unracks it, and he's actually pretty externally rotated here. And he doesn't do what I'm talking about, but you could do this and then do that. Now, I would recommend that for you initially to like really explicitly make it simple. But for him, he does it intuitively. As he comes down, see how he's already here with it? So if you actually pause this is basically as internally rotated as it really gets, as is tolerable, obviously. Like you can't just bench totally straight out. But you see how that compared to yours, it's just notably more out. And most importantly, midway through, it's much more out. So see how yours is more tucked in. See, this is him on the way down. So see, it's not crazy different, but it is different. And he has a wider grip. So if he did your habit, it would be even more exposed here. So it's like, obviously it's hard to have alignment when you're max grip with, which, he's pointer fingers on the rings, whereas your pinky fingers on the rings. So you're still over tucked with a relatively narrow grip. So just to make that clear, because sometimes it's kind of hard to tell just how significantly different it is, but you can really see it the more you look at this. I mean, that's a great example. And you can see how when he presses up, see how he's basically in the same position that he was on the way down. So let's actually do that. Let's copy his. Okay, so this is him on the way down. And this is him on the way up. Wow, look at that. That is perfect. Like the only difference is just the bar path. And that's good, because of the leg drive. You want it to be, if anything, the bar path more towards your face. But look at that. That is perfect alignment. There's no real difference there in terms of his elbow position. Whereas if we look at yours, let's go top single. And the top single is always the best to kind of expose that. Let's go right there. All right, should be good. Hey, that's really good. I've done this so many years now, looking at stuff like this. That was really nice. Yeah, look at that. That is a really big difference in that absolute elbow position there. See? And you see how your chest caves a little bit, which obviously is kind of natural. But the main point is that if you can get this chest up while having this internal rotation, which, yes, that is harder initially, but it's easier to set if you can, because you can consciously decide to do so rather than being thrown into that position only on the way up. Then you decide to do that. Then now you're going to be able to maintain that a lot better because you're not getting thrown into a foreign position. And then you're just going to have the best of all worlds, like really the best of all worlds, big time. So, and stay tight the whole time through, just like how he does. And that's why his arch looked the same on both. Okay, so other than that, I mean, that will be huge. That will definitely be huge. And that could end up altering your end grip width. Like it may be wiser to go slightly wider or even slightly narrower based on really keeping this principle strictly. Is like if having more internal rotation that emulates the eccentric and concentric actually ends up being too taxed on your shoulders, you could then narrow your grip width a little bit while then maintaining that mirrored position, and then you'll still be stronger even with a narrower grip. And then conversely, if this ends up being really effective, then obviously just widening the grip even more will just emphasize it even more. So it'll really just open the doors to you. But most importantly, that probably the single most important thing is that lack of tension you get at the very last 5%. The way you kind of dump it, and you don't just dump it in terms of letting it sink on your chest, that's fine. You dump it in terms of it drifts a little. It's very subtle, but you just know the eye when you see it. Like I know how that feels when during that pause it was moving away from you. It was moving this way. So you see, you pause and it's still moving a little bit, drifting, as opposed to just sticking the pause and it not moving up or down. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely not atrocious, but that is definitely something that would absolutely have a noticeable impact. Other than that, the big thing is just your arch. I think you could just arch a lot more. You're the type of person where I could see you're ultimately doing the style that I often do recommend, but right now the absolute extent of it is so little that I would definitely consider altering your bench style to the feet under you more. So still have that upper back style. Like, yes, I think for you, what you would benefit from is have your feet forward like this to then do that. Yeah, like get that upper back arch, which you do a good job. I can definitely see you have a thoracic arch. But after this, I would start to tuck the feet under more. After you pin your traps, then start to tuck your feet under more. And for you, I would rather see a butt up as high as possible bench style with your feet under you more, rather than a relaxed butt style with the feet more forward. And the reason why I say that is because I'm just not seeing the mobility that clearly demonstrates that this is a better way. Because ultimately, the best way to think about it is this style has the better absolute top end, but it's also harder to be really good with it. So my biggest issue is that as you're pressing, it's just you are too flat backed. Like, especially like here, this is just pretty much a flat back. So I would just ditch that feet forward style. I mean, it definitely can work theoretically, and later on maybe consider it, but you really gotta like perfect it. You really have to perfect the amount that you're really digging in. You have to perfect the amount that you're using your quads to shorten your back by really pushing horizontally with those quads hard. It's just a difficult thing. So at your stage, again, I would rather see you use the quads to get in this position, but then slide those feet up under you. You could just have the feet under you the whole time, but I think a good transition point for you now would be to still set up like this, then scoot those feet under you, and then ultimately end up more in a Connor Lutz position than a Sean Noriega position. So again, Connor Lutz is my favorite example for tucking the feet under. And I think the good thing is, first of all, if you do have heeled shoes, it actually does help. So see how he drives like this, really drives like this, and then look, he's already bringing the feet under. So yeah, you could just bring the feet under immediately. Now, obviously, he's got really good mobility. But see, this is an example of his butt's as high as it possibly could get, so it's barely on the bench. And again, this style's not for everyone because there are some upsides to having the feet more forward to where you relax your glutes, and that can actually enable you to extend even more potentially. But that's only if you have the mobility to do so. So right now, I just suspect that you just don't have that mobility as of now. And again, this is just, it's so hard for this not to work when you really do this, because then just the more you get your feet under you, the better off you'll be. So if you get your feet under you, and then also Connor does a good job at, see that internal rotation that I was talking about? So he does a really good job of both. So I think if you do both of those, I absolutely think that your bench can blow up. But again, if you're doing this, only leg drive a little bit horizontal with the quads to set it up. But then after that setup, then you're thinking up. So then you're actually pushing down on your heels and down on your feet in general. Your heels are just as under you as possible without rising up off the ground. And you're just pushing straight down. And you are pushing with your glutes and with your quads maximally the whole time. So again, instead of your butt just kind of chilling here, it's barely on the bench. So again, that is something where I think that's appropriate for your level of advancement right now. And that's something you can do right now and just make a tangible improvement. And Connor Lutz is the best example that I would emulate. Deadlift, inconsistent slack pull between sessions. Sometimes it's amazing, other times it's lacking. Weirdly, the bar also sometimes moves quicker when form is not as optimal. Well, that definitely makes sense when it comes to deadlift. I don't know why I keep re-clicking this. Okay. Let's see the primer single. All right. Interesting. I think I see what you're talking about when it comes to how to be faster when things get sloppy. I think I see why. The first thing is that you do wedge a very slight amount, but I don't like how subtle it is. It's too subtle. So if I were you, the biggest thing is this is too stagnant, especially this. Like this looks like it's probably slower than you wanted it to be, because like this is just a very stagnant, slow start. It's not really dynamic at all. And you do get a little bit better on the subsequent reps as opposed to the first rep. So like here, no, even that one, not really. I think it was the third one. a little bit. But yeah, the biggest thing is I would like to see you want to wedge the hips so that you're pulling the slack out as you're bringing those hips or those quads into the bar. So David Wilson is the best. So anchoring your hips. It's crazy. This is 7 years old now. But look at this. So it's like more like this, to where it's like he's really bringing it up and bringing it in. Now, it doesn't mean he's bringing it way down or anything crazy, but he's giving himself enough room to where he's actually changing position. He's either, his knees are going in to then out, or his hips are going up to then down, but to a meaningful extent. And I think you're doing, the general principle, but you're doing it with such a small window that it's just not going to be as effective as if you gave yourself more room to really, again, see that your knee position basically doesn't change, and it really is a pretty static start. I would say David Wilson and Sean Noriega are definitely the two best examples for you to emulate. I mean, even Austin Perkins has a pretty similar stance with you in kind of style. I don't know if he's the inspiration a little bit, but even he also does have more of a dynamic start. Let's see here. All right. So let's see how much he does. So yeah, obviously he does have a pretty similar stance with you. Yeah, his is more similar to yours, but still it is a little bit, it's definitely a little bit more. See that? Boom. And I do even think he would benefit from a little bit more. And that's always the nuance too. Yeah, because that was a little bit less. So I would imagine he's the inspiration, because it literally does look exactly like Perkins' deadlift to some extent, but with like a little bit more of a tame start. So yeah, and the big thing too is Perkins does get a little bit more leg drive into it, I believe. Let me see. Let me see. Yeah, let me see. Yeah, I think his shin position was with a little bit more forward knees than yourself. And that's, yeah, because you're here and his is a little, yours are pretty much vertical, and see how he ends up having like he already has a positive shin angle even before he does it. And then he does also after. It's crazy how many different camera angles there are here. But yeah, so I mean, it's obviously pretty similar to his, but again, and you see how he's looking forward, you're looking a little bit more down. So I think the combination of everything, I would just rather see you open things up. And I don't even think Austin Perkins is the best example of that. I think you actually can be more efficient. And obviously squat's huge, and his deadlift is, while strong, it's, very likely driven by how strong his squat is ultimately. Whereas someone like David Wilson, like he's a pure deadlifter, to where his squat is really strong, but it's, really big gap, something like 150-pound gap. And you can tell because look at how fluid this is. Like this is how you really get into that strong position. And then honestly, in terms of long-term strength, I would like to see you slightly widen this stance in addition to this, so that then you can really get that pop and basically your knees come out more as you're wedging into it. So see this? So from this angle is a really good example. So you could basically allow yourself to have a little bit more internal rotation at the hips here, and then you pump, bring your hips up and then through as you're driving with the quads, and then those knees go out more than ever before, and then that's your starting position. And then that would assume your stance width is wide enough to where your knees aren't beyond your feet. But let's look at Angelo Fortino, because his deadlift is also kind of similar to yours. So I want to see, let's see. So he's a great example. So, and again, I do think he's more efficient than Perkins, in that if you're going to deadlift a little bit more with this style. So see how he also does get his knees out. So again, I think you could go slightly wider than Angelo and succeed. But, it's not a huge deal if you keep your stance width exactly the same and then just hip pump a little bit more. I think then you would see the benefits regardless. But my gut feeling is long-term, it may be beneficial to go out just a little bit more. And just see, by doing this, you'll see, and give yourself a little bit more freedom to really move. Then you'll see, are your feet spilling over the outsides of are your feet spilling over on the outsides of your shoes internally or not? And then if they are a little bit after you start doing this, then that's the sign to widen your feet. So you want it to really be this natural evolution. But first, we want to get a little bit more dynamic and a little bit less constrained. Yeah, and especially since you're a pretty narrow or neutral back pooler, I would say someone like Perkins, I think I've seen his deadlift from the side. I don't think it's actually that neutral. So a lot of times guys like that, they're able to get away with it because they have more speed off the floor by being a little bit looser as well. Whereas if you have a really strict neutral back, that's where then you want to get a little bit more creative and dynamic with your lower body to generate some momentum, because it's going to be the most stickiest part of the lift is going to be off the floor if you're more of a neutral back puller. So yeah, I think that hip pump, and then again, so the three examples I would look to would be Angelo Fortino, closest to you. Then David Wilson, I would say, is the most optimal. And then I would say Sean Noriega is also, very optimal as well. So Sean's probably in between Wilson and Fortino, but I think Wilson's a fantastic example of something that is kind of like your ideal. And I think you could still apply the Wilson principles, so to say, even to a narrower stance sumo deadlift. And then lastly, I would also just get rid of these shoes. I think there's no reason to just deadlift in shoes like that other than just if you have to because of your gym, I would just use deadlift slippers. And I don't think you have to because it's a deadlift platform. So I think you could get away with socks, but just get deadlift slippers on Amazon that are like $10. And with your stance width and the way that you deadlift, I don't think you would have any issue with spilling over the outsides of the feet at all. I don't think so whatsoever. And that would immediately improve your deadlift as well. Greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. That was excellent. That was a lot of points. Okay. Next one, we got Johnson. Yep. He says, links to squats. Hi, Johnny. I've had a meniscus tear after a while, so full knee flexion is painful, so I stopped the range of motion just below parallel where it's pain-free. But I see my depth is kind of inconsistent. Is this a big issue? How should I go about fixing this? Any other critiques to my form would be much appreciated, too. Okay, let's see. All right. I was going to make a racial joke about how we have 3 Asians in a row. I don't know how to say that as politically correct as possible, but it is funny because I think there's no Asian lifters and then 3 in a row. Okay, now let's go. Let's look at your squat technique. First of all, it looks great. It honestly looks phenomenal. I mean, that is, there's not too much that I would change off top. I mean, this depth is pretty good. This depth's pretty good. You've had a meniscus tear, so full knee flexion. Okay, so you stop just below parallel where it's pain-free. Your depth is a little inconsistent. Is this a big issue? I'd say no, actually it's not. It's not a big issue because, first of all, I'm curious what that belt is. So that belt looks interesting. It looks a little Velcro-ish. If that's a Velcro belt, I do strongly recommend using a real leather belt, but I can't tell. It might be leather, but it looks a little Velcro-ish to me, the way it's so form-fitting. So that would be my first concern. Second of all, I don't think you have a big issue because at the end of the day, the thing that you have to look at is that all these high-level lifters, they tend to squat kind of borderline most of the time in training. And the reality is all you really need to do is just hit your 1 rep max to depth. And yes, obviously you don't want to squat high all the time and expect it to hit the depth, right? But the inconsistency is actually okay because ultimately, you're not going to perfectly hit the exact same squat. And if you make it to where, and I used to have this issue, to where no matter what you're hitting depth, a lot of times what happens is then you end up squatting too deep on average because your highest squat is still to depth and then your lowest squat is well below parallel, assuming we have a 3-inch range that we're working with. Let's just imagine we can't hit it perfectly each time. Well, then your average is going to be 1.5 inches too deep. And with you, to me, it looks like your average is like right at depth. Maybe your average is a little bit pushing it, but definitely on some reps, you're hitting close enough to depth. I mean, I would probably just go down like 1/2 inch deeper, realistically. Like, yeah, you probably do need to go down like to, maybe a full 1.5 inches deeper. I'll say that. But on some reps, you pretty much get close to there. Like this rep, I'd say like, that's pretty close. That's pretty good. But yeah, I would definitely scale it down just a little bit because I think a good way to think about it isn't the inconsistency as much as you want to make sure at least a handful of reps are to depth basically on every day, right? At some point. So you'd say on this day, just have at least like 3 reps that are basically to depth. Here's actually a really good tactic, and I strongly recommend this for you, is on the last rep of every set, make it a point to nail depth. And I know that sounds kind of funny, like it sounds kind of like cutting corners, but it actually can be a really good tool, because the biggest concern that I have is if squat depth gradually gets higher, the later in a set you are, because then it's exposing that as you're more fatigued, you're basically cutting out the range of motion to be able to hit those reps, right? So it's actually distorting your projected strength on that day. Whereas if you have some reps that are a little bit high earlier in the set, but then you actually nail depth later in the set, both you're more warmed up, which will mean less likely to be injured. And obviously you don't want to abuse this. I don't want super high reps and then just hit depth to sneak it in. But if you have borderline, and then you make sure the 10th rep or the 9th and 10th rep, something like that, you could do the last 2 reps. Just absolutely sink it no matter what. Obviously not to a level it's going to cause pain, but just make it a point. Then you'll know, okay, the hardest reps you had there no matter what, that there was no question. So I think that's a good way to think about it, is it's okay if the first 3 reps of a 8 rep set are high. And then maybe the next 3 reps are iffy. So like that first rep being the highest, that's fine. Second rep's high, that's fine. Third rep high, that's fine. And then that was deeper than the first 2. So it's like right around here. I'd like to see that get a little deeper. In this one, again, a little deeper. So it's like, it's more of that gradual, then, okay, just ease into it more and more. Now, as far as some of the tangible tips that I would give beyond the flow of it, is I do see your heels come up a little bit, but I don't think that's a big issue, because ultimately we do want to be in our forefoot. That is a good thing. It's something I emphasize a lot. Now, one thing is that, similar to the past couple lifters, is that you're extended very well, which is good, but I would say either slightly adjust the stance width so that it's easier to hit depth while being this extended. And for you, that would likely mean, I would guess it would mean widening the stance width, but it depends. Some people, the wider stance width, the more knee pain, and then narrower actually less. But I would suspect for you, it would be easier to hit depth if you slightly widen your stance width and then kept this amount of extension. But what I would also consider would be keep the stance width exactly the same and just extend your back a little bit less. So a good way to think about this tactically is that you want to make up for whatever pain area by displacing the force production or the strain on another muscle group to compensate. You want to compensate in a way that's rational. So for you, because extending the back less would also not even be bad. I think you're slightly extended beyond what's neutral, but not to a problematic level for most people. Like here, I'd say you could probably be a little bit more neutral with basically with your rib cage. Like, see how your chest is up high? It's not awful, but I think we could just bring your chest down just a little bit. And most importantly, your butt. Like, see how your butt's really poked out? And it looks like you have big, strong glutes, but you could just tuck that just a little bit in, just a little bit. And I'd say Calgary barbell is a great example of this. So let's go to Calgary barbell. Okay. So he is fantastic at this. So watch how he squats. So see how he's really tucked and he never overextends. So he's actually had knee and hip pain before too. So I think that's why he's really perfected things. But this is a great example. By doing this, it's going to be easier to hit depth, because by tucking your pelvis a little bit more, now you're not going to be as when you're arched, you're basically cutting your hip flexion range of motion, because your anterior pelvic tilt. So basically, if you're ducking out, well, then you run out of hip range of motion sooner. Whereas if you imagine someone arched and then unwind that, well, now you can sink a little bit deeper and you still have the same maximum hip flexion. But now, because of that anterior pelvic tilt is removed, now you have that additional range of motion as basically free range of motion. So it's basically a good way to think about it is that if you start out ducked out, it's almost like you're starting on a leg press where you're already in some form of hip flexion before you even begin. So if you unwind that, now you're at totally neutral. So now you have additional hip flexion that you just bought for free. Hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, he is a good example. So, and why I say that this would be a good adjustment to make, if not changing his stance width, is because, like, look at his stance width. So this is a great example of like, this is a great way to hit depth, because if he was more ducked out with his butt and more poking it out, he would not be able to hit depth with that stance width, because then he would both run out of hip flexion and run out of knee flexion at the same time. So hopefully that makes sense. But again, if you really do find that you prefer like really relying on your hip flexion to just like bottom out hardcore, because sometimes that does feel good as a rebound, that's where then I would just widen the stance width a little bit. So you basically decide either you really want to really overload those hip flexors and widen out the stance, or you want to just bring things into a more neutral position. And ultimately, if you kept the stance width the same and then fix those hips, it'd really be your back that just has a little bit more of the load on it with that additional depth, no change in total knee flexion, or at least pretty small amount of change. And I think you could definitely handle that. So, all right, that's it. So one of those two options. But yeah, everything else looks great. Everything else looks fantastic. I mean, one thing I will add is I do think in the very long term, it could be worth considering low bar in the very long term if that knee issue is that persistent, and it could just alter things a lot. So I do think that is worth considering in the very long term. But yeah, overall, in terms of position, everything, I mean, your squat looks fantastic. You do a good job of bracing. And the one final piece is, if this is a Velcro belt, I do think the belt could be very, very slightly looser. So by it being a little bit looser, it'd also make it easier to hit depth without, again, that would just coincide well with what I was talking about with the more neutral pelvis, with the butt not being poked out as much. But again, still the exact same, torso angle and knee position, just that alteration of letting the rib cage go down a little bit, letting your abs get a little bit more like forward. If the belt was slightly looser, it'd also make it easier to do that. Because sometimes when the belt's insanely tight, it just naturally makes you want to overextend. And just becomes hard to let your stomach fill the belt. Instead, it's like you're breathing really high, and then your chest ends up wanting to arch because you're breathing into your chest because that belt's just super, super tight. So I'd also consider loosening the belt very slightly. And I think that, and then the pelvic tilt, I think would absolutely make you nail depth and you'd be good to go. And then, like I said, long term, medium to long term, you could consider widening the stance width. Long term, you can consider low bar. So that'll do it. I think that'll do it for you. Okay, Motaaz has a lot. Okay. This is a lot. It's a lot. Okay, hello, Johnny. Below videos are... Okay, these are all squat. No, there's squat and deadlift. Okay, let me see. Okay, it says, below the videos implementing the changes you told me in the last form check. Thank you for that. I stopped using bumper plates like you said. It definitely feels different, and I'm still adjusting to it. And I noticed it feels like I'm overshooting, but from what I'm watching the video, it looks good. Is that normal? Okay, let's see. Wait, do you say... we may have an issue. Okay. You said for the squat. Okay, it seems like the squat is on private mode, unfortunately, while the deadlift is good to go. Okay, so we'll look at what we can look at. Sorry about that, because I do really like nailing everything, but I guess that'll have to be for a future form check. And also, I don't mind you sending so much. Sorry for the reaction, because I'm just trying to zoom through these a little bit now. But I like that's why, if anything, I definitely want to see the squat. I want to see everything. Okay, so unfortunately, I will have to just answer your question. So as far as if it feels normal, I would say yes. I think it's really an interesting thing is that, first of all, it is possible that when using real competition plates, if that's what you're using, you stopped using bumper plates. And I don't know, you're probably not using competition plates, just regular plates. With the competition plates, sometimes it actually is heavier, and you find out that, these plates are not as heavy. And that could be possible also with regular iron plates versus bumpers. Sometimes bumpers are like 43 pounds, and then iron ones are 45 pounds. Or if you're in, obviously, if you're not in America, 20 kilograms versus like 18 kilograms. That is possible. But it's also very likely that with bumpers, lighter weights move really well because that bounce really feels good. That whip on the bar, that oscillation. It's almost like a deadlift bar, but for the squat. However, For the max, 1 rep maxes, that's where it becomes a problem. So I would say it's probably actually true that with bumpers, you can probably hit more reps with, let's say, 75 to 80%. But it's also actually true that you could hit more weight without bumpers, most likely. So I think that, it does, with the way it feels like you're overshooting, it probably in some sense is true as far as potential reps in reserve, but it's not true in sense of pounds in reserve, if you get what I'm saying. So it is a nuanced thing. Also, I noticed that I look down when I descend, then look up near the top. Is there room for improvement there? Okay, that I'll just have to see in a future video, so a future form check. So definitely send that in next time. We'll get that going next time. But we do have a Q&A next. But we're really cranking these, so it won't be too long until the next one. So the deadlift looks great. Yeah, you're really getting a lot stronger. I just started deadlifting for the first time in a while, and I'm just trying to figure out the ideal setup and execution. Sometimes I do one bumper and the rest back plates. Is that fine, or should I do only, or black plates, or should I do only black plates? Also, I don't know if it's okay to use straps. Do I use them on pause deadlifts? As for my technique, I want to know what you think about the back position, especially lower back. Okay, so I have a general rule when it comes to straps, is that assuming you don't want to max out with straps, if you want to max out with straps, that's fine. Then that's it, and you can use it whenever. But if you want to preserve your 1 rep max without straps, and you want to continue to improve it without straps, and that matters independent, or you're, for competition long term, then absolutely you don't want to go long periods of time of only strapping. So a great way to do it is on your light pause deadlift days is to do 1 set without straps. And just that's it. Just make it a rule that every single time you're going to warm up without straps. Because the real part where people lose the plot when it comes to straps is they use straps on those easy warm-up sets. So after their first 2 warm-up sets, then it's all straps. And then their top set straps, everything straps. That's where then you completely forget and lose that pattern of how to even flow and set up and warm up without them. Whereas if you're going to do it, let's say a 3x4 pause deadlift, let's say with myself, if I was going to do a 3x4 pause deadlift with 495 pounds, I would do, like I said, 135, 225, 315, 405, 495 for the set of 4, and then all without straps, and then say, okay, well then the back off 2 sets of 4, absolutely can use straps and just blow it up. Because if you do it that way, a lot of times you'll find out, actually using straps kind of is not preferable. Like you may be able to move it faster without straps. And we want it to always feel like that, to where it's like if you're using straps, it's only as a tool and not as a weapon to transmit more power, quicker into the bar, which can be a temptation to really yank on the bar if you're using it all throughout. But right now you're having, you have really good technique here. But again, that's a universal rule. No matter what, I would do that on every day. Both pause day and competition day. Because that's the kind of funny thing is a lot of people think that it's a matter of like percentage of volume using straps or not using straps, but it's really the exposure frequency that matters the most when it comes to your skin strength and the movement pattern. So it's really a matter of always hitting the first set without straps. And then you could adjust the percentages where I would say on a light day, you could definitely do like 2 out of 3 sets with straps. And then on a primary day, I would definitely prefer to at least hit half or more without straps so that you're not overly reliant. But it would be possible that someone could just hit 1 set on both days without straps and then everything else with straps. That could potentially work. But again, I think that would be risking it just a little bit. But your deadlift looks great. I would probably look a little bit more up. I'm just generally more of a fan of that for the sumo deadlift. But given your position and how strong you look in this position, this looks fantastic to where, there's not too much that I would change here. So deadlifts, I just started, for the first time in a while. As for my technique, what do you think about my back position, especially lower back? I think your lower back looks excellent. Yeah, I think your lower back looks pretty much perfect. Now, probably the only thing is in between reps. Let's see. I don't know if you... Yeah, see that one, that's funny. That was the only one where you didn't. This one, you didn't do the hip pump. So probably just make sure you do the hip pump every single rep. I know that's, something that was just a random rep where you didn't do it. But it can always be tempting to just get a little bit sloppy. Now, the one thing too, this is probably the biggest thing, is I would make sure to be more aggressive on that first rep. So that could be a temptation, is that sometimes the first rep to kind of ease into it. So see how it's like you set your hips, then you kind of pull separately rather than pulling the slack out of the bar while you're setting the hips, which you do a little bit better on the second rep and beyond. So that's the one thing I would just make sure on that first rep to still attack it. Because if you start to get passive on the first rep, and I've had this issue before, then on a 1 rep max, you can start doing that. And you might do that at a meet, like set your hips and then pull up, as opposed to setting the hips while pulling up. So that rep's good. That rep right there was really good. But yeah, so as far as sometimes one bumper and the rest black plates, I hate to say it, but yeah, I think it is a problem. Because I've done it before, and I've actually deadlifted sumo 585 for 8 reps with no straps, with an Ohio power bar, with one bumper, and then all the rest iron plates, and at 168 pounds. And that was like by far the best set of my life. I mean, to this day, that's probably on paper the best deadlift set of my life, given I was only 168 or 169 pounds. And the crazy part is that was like, I just went through a conventional deadlift phase and then just deadlifted sumo for the first time in 3 or 4 weeks. Not a crazy long time, not like months, but that took like a 4-week phase and then came back. And that was literally day 1. So that's a great example of like that kind of shows just how strong the effect is, to be honest, because at that time I really never deadlifted that much over 639, 645 in competition with kilogram plates and with like obviously the competition plates, the thin kilogram plates. So yeah, I think it does have a bigger effect than people think. I will say that, because again, that was with an Ohio power bar also, which is a really stiff competition bar. So I'd say with a commercial gym bar and that, yeah, it can get crazy. It can get crazy. It can get too crazy, because obviously even just regular pound plates, all the black plates with no bumper, that already is a lot different than competition standards. But yeah, I think that bumper, because it moves everything out more, it really does amplify everything that you continue to load on it. So the stronger you get, even more profound that effect will get. Whereas if that bumper was on the end, obviously it wouldn't have as big of an effect. So, which I don't recommend either though. So yeah, I know it's tough to do because it feels so good and like it does stabilize things, but I think you just gotta not. I think you gotta do all the black plates and just accept it. That, yeah, it's just, it is a little bit of a cheat code, and it hurt. I remember when I first stopped doing it and I was like, yeah, it really did. Like I said, I did do 600 for 10 at one point, I think, or 600 for 9 with competition plates. So that was probably a more impressive set, but then I was like a whole, nearly 20 pounds heavier. I was like 15 pounds heavier, like just a lot more muscle on me. So that was the biggest like anomaly set. And like to give more context, I think my squat only was like 525 or 535 at the time because I was, lighter. So that was a great example of like, that is just how much when you really leverage it, it can go crazy. And I'm sure that you probably feel really strong right now. And I'm sure you are obviously really strong from just the overall building you've been doing. But I think it does show that it gets suspiciously strong a little prematurely when using that one bumper, for sure. Okay, good. Here you are without it. So for these, I would like you to pause lower. That's the main thing. Is definitely pause right here. I want it this low as opposed to that. Because when you start to pause a little bit higher, it's almost like you're getting into the lift, as opposed to, I want it to affect as you're breaking off of 4, you have to be more careful, as opposed to popping it and then pausing as like 2 separate acts, if you get what I'm saying. So it really slows you down in a good way. I mean, this is a great position. Like, yeah, I'd say overall, this is fantastic. So yeah, I mean, you may be the rare case where I don't mind the head position being like this, just because your overall position's so good. But I just suspect for 1 rep max, usually people end up, their head comes up just a little bit more. So I think it probably feels just a little bit better. Just have it, and just even what I think would be best to just have it a little bit more like this, like just your gaze here, as opposed to looking like straight down. And I think that's my big issue with the more head down mindset, is it can just get overdone to where then it's like literally not neutral. It's like almost like a flexed, technically I think this is cervical extension, but it always makes sense that you would call it flexion. But it's like a head down position as opposed to a head neutral position. Anyways, so yeah, overall that was great. I mean, that was honestly, I don't think that other than the bumper point issue and the pause location issue, I don't and the hip dip aggressiveness. Other than those points, I think I really don't have anything else I cracked. Like that looks perfect from the front. The way your stance width, the way you get those knees out, the way your lockout, the way you lock the knees out, the way you synchronize that, the way you keep the bar close, you keep the forefoot pressure on. Like this is perfect. Your shin angle is not too positive, but there's some leg drive. I mean, that is exactly what I recommend. Bench, I widened my grip like you recommended, went from pinkies on the rings to index on the rings. It felt better. I'm slightly stronger and I'm experiencing no discomfort. Excellent. I should note that the rings on the barbell are 28 inches apart, not 32, but do I do feet up or close grip bench in the 10-week bench variation? I would say for you, feet up bench for sure, both based on the grip width, and then also you have to think because you're adapting to new grip width, it'd be better to definitely get some more reps on it, and that feet up would get you really obviously extended range of motion in that bottom position. And to be clear, with feet up bench, I do recommend that you would almost intentionally have a flatter back, so don't try to maximize your arch while having feet up, so that then you really get that bottom portion of the chest strength. Yeah, now it wouldn't be the end of the world if you did close grip, but generally speaking, when you're moving on from a style, a lot of times it's best to kind of avoid that old style because otherwise it can be tempting to basically you could end up being the average of your training effect. So if you widen your competition grip, but then you also are doing narrow grip in training, it's like your optimal strength may be in between again. And now, usually that's not an issue for someone who's very clearly established with a wider grip potentially. It could just be close grip's a good muscle builder. That can happen, but usually that's after years of experience with that wider grip. And also, obviously, even that's limited. Like that's why I do recommend feet up for wider grip benchers at some point, because you just get to a point where it's such a different style of movement. So I would rather see you just kind of totally move away from that while still, obviously the strength from that narrower grip history-wise will still carry over. But yeah, I would just do that. And ultimately, obviously variations or any type of neutral grip dumbbell bench or machine chest press, whatever comes up in tricep work will sustain you in terms of your overall strength while just totally moving away from that narrower grip. Okay, excellent. So next we have Nick Wynn. Oh wait, did he already send one earlier? Or is that Clifton? We have two wins. Okay, so I'm telling you, this is a disproportionate amount of Asian lifters because Wynn is. I'm gonna try to guess. What is Wynn? What is that? Thailand? I think that's a Thai last name, right? Let me know in the comments if you've seen this far. Is Wynn? Because I know it's pronounced Wynn. Because I remember there's a deadlift record holder way back in the day, like 10 or 11. I think literally longer than that, like 12 or 13 or 14 years ago. And his last name was Wynn. And I remember he deadlifted 716. I think at either 183 or 165. But yeah, I remember actually talking to him like about that. I forget how that came up. Anyways, let's get back on topic. Okay, 315 times 1 squat. Okay, let's see. Good. Really good. Okay, really good. Especially if you're aiming for ass to grass. Let's see if you say, hey, coach, I'm pleased to report that I set 2 PRs today after finishing another cycle of the Can Do 6-week program. Excellent. There's nothing I like hearing more than that. For my squat, I got a belt and switched to high bar completely. Okay. I focused on my knees tracking more inward and my knees feel much better. Excellent. I was able to hit so did you ever send a form check before? The way you're talking about corrections, it almost gives me that vibe. Let me see. Aha, you did on the, okay. So let's see. Aha, yeah. Wow, yeah, you really changed your style. That's interesting. Oh, yeah, you were the one with the really knee cave, right? Oh, was it really strong? No, it didn't look that strong there. I thought it was real. Okay, yeah, it's real. Because I remember looking at like pausing it before and after. Yeah, I remember that now. It's always funny. Man, that's crazy. That's actually crazy to go to high bar and then, ass to grass. That definitely is a testament to finding your alignment joint wise to where, I mean, that is insane. And you hit it very smoothly. Okay, so let's get back to what you said. Okay, so you said, for my squat, I got a belt and switched to high bar, completely focused on my knees striking inward, and my knees are feeling much better. I was able to hit 25 on the bar compared to last form check. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I mean, that's very interesting. The fact that you're squatting that deeply is very interesting. So I'd say, I mean, right now, I just keep things going exactly as they are. Long term, I definitely could see figuring out a way to maybe high bar squat with slightly less depth, like still continuing the theme of having all the advantages of the more inward knee position and everything. But yeah, right now, I would honestly change nothing because this is just a great strength training tool too. And I could see, in the end of the day, I think the thing I'd be curious about would be a low bar, because I do think it'd probably be hard for you to squat high bar and not ass to grass with knees more in. Like that tends to just naturally be that. So I think the question would be, could you squat low bar and knees more in and then barely hit depth and then just hit squat like 335? I think that'd be interesting, but I don't think you should try it right now. I think you should just continue exactly what you're doing. And I mean, it is possible that your high bar is just stronger, but I think the thing that would be surprising would be if an ass to grass squat's strongest. I think almost certainly, because I've seen some people have a higher high bar or stronger high bar than low bar, but almost nobody I've seen truly long term. Even Bryce Lewis kind of started cutting his depth a little bit more if you actually look at his hip position. Almost nobody's actually stronger with that extra depth being significant. So again, obviously both you're stronger and in a bigger range of motion. So this is a great problem to have. And I think from this point, I would keep it going until 330 at least of ass to grass. But then right after 330, if I were you, that's where then I would go, okay, how can we refine this so I'm not going ass to grass while still keeping those knees in? Okay, you say my bench went up 10 pounds after allowing my elbows flare a little bit more. Excellent. Let's see how this is looking. Very good. Yeah, very good. Because this is still, your elbows still are decently tucked. So, yeah, I continue doing that. Like I'd say, if anything, you may actually be able to flare the elbows even more, just a little bit. Because, yeah, I mean, this is a pretty tucked position, but probably better than the past. And it's all work in progress. Now, main thing is that as it presses off here, you pressed a little flat. So let's imagine you keep the elbow tuck exactly the same. The big thing is you're going to want to press up and back immediately. You want that to be the first thing you do. So my only concern here is that the first thing you did is you press flat, then it moves back now. And see how that sticking point is weirdly late because of that. So if you press up and back more immediately, then you'll be able to lock it out much easier, because then you won't be also having to press up and back too. So it'll make both points easier. It'll make both right off the chest easier and lockout easier. As opposed to here, you're kind of like elongating that sticking point because you're just slowly accepting it being more and more over your face. So that would be the one thing that, John Hack is a great example. Watch how he presses up and back immediately off the chest. So see, he touches here and then boom. See how it's like right away rather than pressing flat off the chest. And even that wasn't honestly the best clip. Let me see if this angle actually shows it more. We got a lot of yapping going on. Show it. There we go. See that? This is perfect. This is a perfect display of it. See how it's like right away it popped up and back. See, towards his face. Boom. And then it pressed out flatter, higher. And again, there are people who do it better than him too. Like he's not the best in the world at that. Obviously, he is one of the best in the world at the bench. But yeah. So, yeah, I would say that. And then also the big thing is to make sure that you stay patient when it comes to your bench in this respect. So see how when you do touch, you kind of raise the butt up a little bit. So, I'm a bigger fan of more maximal leg drive before the bar even touches your chest. I would say that's definitely the trend. So this, I wouldn't say this is wrong necessarily. Your butt does come up a little bit off the bench, but that's fine for just a training PR, as long as it's the same standard across time. But the big thing is that I would say in the long term, I'm a little bit bigger of a fan of maximizing that leg drive already. So that then you touch it and just press. I think you'll be more consistent because like the way you turn on the leg drive before it touches your chest, I think that's just going to create, I think that probably contributes to some of that inconsistency with the bar path. So yeah, I would just maximize that just a little bit more. Let's see your old one. I mean, that is a great PR. Yeah, you kind of did the turn on thing. Yeah, if I were you, I really would just maximize leg drive. I think that would definitely be better because I think you could get a lot more of an arch and you would have a lot less inconsistency because when you really do that turn on, like you're going to be very susceptible to cramping. Whereas if you just maximize that leg drive the whole time, like let's get back to the John Hack thing. He's probably a good example of someone who doesn't have a crazy arch. So he probably does turn it on a little bit. Let's see his legs and everything. So see that? See how it's like he's like shaking and he's already like that. So see, he's already really pushing into there. And then it's like there's no one point where he's turning it on. And I think you'll absolutely see more consistency by doing that. And you'll just be in a better position. You'll just be stronger. Let's see his 562 bench here. So see, set the feet, plant it strongly, and just really dig in. Like you can just see he's got a strong platform to push from. Yeah. So that would be my number one tip. Not probably, that is my number one tip for you. For the deadlift, I think I'm doing some major things wrong. I didn't get any change in 1 rep max after using a belt and lifting straps. When the bar is close to my shins and over the midfoot, it feels like I need to sit back more for my arms to be straight, but doing it also feels like I'm in a squat. Interesting. I have my hips high, my torso is parallel to the ground. What do you think? Okay, we're just going to have to see what's going on. Okay, yeah, I'd say your back position is probably, yeah. Your back position's very Chinese weightlifter style, like very, a little too head up and everything. I think the biggest thing that you mentioned as far as parallel to the floor, this is a fine position. Like this isn't, I wouldn't even call this close to parallel to the floor. This is fine. Like this is just how a deadlift is. You have to embrace it. Now, as far as you saying that you didn't get anything out of a belt and straps, that part's the weirdest. Let me see. Let me see here and then... yeah, because I mean, it's, it's not like you're... Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is, I think you did just... I think you corrected an issue with another issue. So before you were squatting into it too much and everything, but ultimately you're moving fluidly and you end up in a position that's still, this is still, really bent over forward, right? I think the issue is like here, this rock back, you're too much on your heels. You're obviously you're not actually pulling from this position, but even to set this up, it's in a way, it's even more stifled than this one because at least this one by squatting with your shins coming forward, you're at least still getting on your forefoot, which is good. And that's why this feels more natural. So I think you can do this with a belt. If I were you, I would just ditch the straps and get chalk, to be honest, because you could be one of those people where, hey, let's just use chalk. Let's keep the conditions the same. But I think I pointed out how you don't use chalk at all here, right? So typically, I'd rather someone use straps than no chalk. But for your case, I really think you should use chalk and just really conservatively keep it in a container so that you don't spill it anywhere, and you should be fine. And then I would ditch the straps if I were you. But I think the setup, you can kind of get an in-between of this. I do like how you're more on your forefoot here. You just don't need to bend at the elbows and really over dip the hips, but still stay more forward. Because here, yeah, I just don't like, the bar is a little too close to you. I just think you compensated on a lot of things. The bar's really close to you, and see, your shins actually probably could be very slightly more forward than this, but especially when you rock back like that, now you're getting pitched forward. The momentum's kind of moving against your favor. Now, I am curious what belt that is. That actually looks like a pretty thin belt. So, make sure this is a regulation belt. Is this a regulation belt? Because this really does look kind of thin. Like the just sheer surface area of this looks weird. Like your belt buckle is almost as much surface area as everything. So I'm sure it's a 10 millimeter or 13 millimeter in terms of thickness, but in terms of like just surface area, it looks too thin to me. Weird. I've never seen a belt look quite like that, where like it almost looks like an SBD belt, but like cut like 20% of it off or 30% of it off. So I would double check on what belt you actually have, and I would say if that's not a total regulation belt, like if that's on Amazon and it's a weird kind of cheaper belt, I would definitely get like a Titan belt. Titan is a good company that's kind of in between, not as expensive as SBD, but more expensive than some other Amazon options and just totally legit. Because, yeah, I think if you went back to this style for the most part and then use the belt, I think there's just no way you're not going to be stronger. and then you could start to tweak with certain things. You know what I would do? I know that it may be too expensive, but I would get a single prong belt also. Because at this point, if the belt's not working for you and it's a lever belt, and yeah, I'm kind of questioning how wide or how much surface area there's. But I would get the single prong belt because then you can adjust it too. Because for some people, adjust it more easily. Now, again, if you want to use your tools to adjust your lever belt, you can. But anytime the belt is not working on the deadlift, that's a sign to either loosen it by one, tighten it by one, just make those little adjustments. Because it is very possible that a certain amount of tightness on the deadlift is a little bit looser than your tightness on the squat. That happens all the time. That's why I was never a fan of lever belts, to be honest. It's just not as easy to adjust. But yeah, I definitely think that can be fixed. And I think that it is just too far on the heels. Bar is super close to where it's like stifling you. You do want your shins to ultimately meet the bar. Like, I don't know if I may have used the example because I think I used Rondell Hunt a lot in that form check for a lot of people. I don't know if I did for you. But even the way Rondell Hunt deadlifts, it is such a beautiful example because you could see how he's not rocking back. He's still meeting the bar. So he's still meeting the bar even though his hips are a little bit higher than yours were in that first video. So he's not getting crazy sloppy with the amount of forward knee movement on the setup. And the main thing is your elbow bend. I think this is the number one thing I don't like. The number one thing I don't like is the elbow bend. You could keep a lot of other parts to this without that elbow bend. But again, I don't like being on the heels that much. So see that? Let's see how much elbow bend does Rondell Hunt have. See that? That's perfect. So see how even as he sets his hips, his knees and stuff, see how he still doesn't bend the elbows? Because when you start bending the elbows, that's where then it starts to get to where you're trying to squat it up. But the main point is that, so the good part that he's doing that's similar to your video here is he is meeting the bar. He's giving it, see how much space he's giving it? Probably a little too much, but it shows that too much space isn't that bad of a thing. So he's meeting the bar with his shins, but then also keeping his arms straight. And then he can both be explosive and still control this position. Whereas when you're like this, you have a controlled position, but you're super not explosive because the bar is so close to you. Your shins are, like I said, you probably could get away with a slightly more, but most importantly, it's just everything is back. Like you're trying to get on your heels as much as possible. And that's just not going to be as strong of a position. And that's ultimately why, look what happens. When you're too far back, the first thing that happens is look at the bar path. See how it drifts that far forward? And that's why it's hard all throughout the lift. Whereas Rondell Hunt is very slightly, has the bar too far forward. So then what's the first movement of the bar? Let's watch here. And I've already seen this, so I know the answer. See, boom, it actually swoops in. So the thing that's tricky is it's actually better for the bar to swoop slightly in than to swoop slightly out. So again, to recap, I really want you to just ditch the straps because I do think it's easier to handle all this without it. But I would ditch the straps, still use the belt, or buy a new belt that, is regulation. If it's not, it just looks weird to my eyes. It may just be the video. Because on the squat, I think it looked fine. But then the other adjustment would be no arm bend. So more like that first video, but no arm bend. And if you do both of those, I definitely think no arm bend and belt and no straps, I think then we will see the best of all worlds. Okay, we have the very last form check. We have Kevin Vargas. I believe he's been in a handful of form checks, right? Let me pull it up just in case. So this will be a great last form check here. No. Okay, this is it. All right. Let's see what we got here. He says, hey, Johnny, below are 2 deadlifts. I do feel like this is my best lift form-wise. I might need to start closer to the bar, not sure, but I also feel like I twist to the right when deadlifting after I engage my right lat more than my left. All right, let's see. Okay, good. Let's see. Okay, so what do you say? I might need to start closer to the bar. No, I would say no. No. Definitely no on the starting closer to the bar. I think you do a good job. Because the main thing is that, this again gets back to, I'll use the same example for you. I know I've been using this example all day, is Rondell Hunt, because I got these time-stamped. I'll just make sure to use the same example just in case you're just skipping straight to your part. I think this is a great example. So see that space between him and the bar? It's very similar to yours, given that angle. And I think he has one of the most efficient deadlifts in the world. So if anything, I actually think the way you initiate the deadlift, you could initiate it a little bit more on your forefoot rather than your heels. So see how this is a great example. Like, see how he's like, he both actually has a decent amount of space, and then he's popping it up and really driving and embracing that strength. So with you, I think you would be stronger if, you definitely don't start with the bar further forward out. That was hard to say. But I think the way that you get into position, see how you tighten your back and then you're rocking back a lot. And I think rocking back can be okay, but I do think you're overdoing it a little bit in that you're getting on your heels. So it's like a very textbook style deadlift, but typically it's not the strongest. Whereas typically what we want to see is you want your lower back especially to be, obviously neutral and all that, but you kind of want to meet the bar as opposed to being forward and then by rocking back, you're really extending into it. I just think you're getting a little passively on your heels. And I think that's why you see the first movement bar path wise from the bars, it swoops in. So see how much it kind of swoops in? Let's see across reps because I saw it a lot. So see how it goes out, then kind of swoops in, and then back out. So again, the bar path kind of swoops in. That was the best example. So see how the bar path like swoops inward and then goes out. So ultimately, we just want this to be, pretty much straight up and down. Obviously, it's okay if it swoops in a little bit, but I think it's swooping in more than it needs to be because you're getting on your heels soon. So see, this is too locked out. So see, this is a very hard position to finish the lift from. So I think this is why it feels like the bar is starting out too far forward, because by this point, you have some space between you and the bar. But the problem is not the bar position. The problem is you're on your heels and your knees are fully locked out. And your knees are locked out because you're on your heels. So I'd say your heels are the number one initial cause, and everything else is happening around it. So again, to go back to the Rondell Hunt example, and I cannot strongly recommend enough that just like constantly look at his deadlift. Like this is going to be very applicable to you. Is look at how he starts off, okay, leg drive, and then it does swoop in a little bit in the sense that like, yeah, that's a natural thing sometimes, especially if you start with the knees a little bit more forward. Yeah, obviously, things are going to have to even out here. But watch the key difference. Look at his knee position. Look at his knee position here. So look at your knee. Your knees are completely locked out and it's lower. He's higher up and his knees still aren't locked out. He's still got some bend in there. And that's because he didn't go back on his heels as much. So when you stay more in your forefoot, just think about it like jumping or like any athletic movement. By being in your forefoot, now your balance is here. So you're not rocked back to where then everything's going to be, pushed back, locked out, hips high. Like, yeah, all these things, we don't want to fear having high hips. We don't want to fear using our back, using our hamstrings, but it's the balance that's the main point. Is when the balance is on your heels and you're drifting back on your heels, you basically can't get out of that position. And that's why it's harder, to recover. Whereas here, look at this. So look at where his knees are. Look at where his knees are. See how his knees still aren't locked, and then they just lock simultaneously at the top. So that's really a perfect deadlift. Whereas yours, your knees are completely locked. So again, that's a very subtle thing. Let's actually look at Rondell Hunt's angle from the back, because this would be really interesting to look at the knee position, because I don't think I've actually looked at the knee position mid-lift on that. So see, this is perfect. So see here how it is ironic, because it will feel like you have the bar too far forward because you're actually too far on your heels. So you're actually swooping it in more. So see how he both starts with the bar still decently far forward at the start, but it doesn't swoop in as much because of that constant forefoot pressure. Now it's like his knees are constantly meeting the bar. Now again, you don't want to overdo this to where then you end up pushing the bar out forward. Obviously, bar swooping in inward and then it getting kicked out forward, both are mistakes in either direction. We want it to be pretty much straight up and down, not obsessively so, but pretty much straight up and down. But the key point, so the key error would be if you went the other way, then you'd be kicking, the knees would get in the way of the bar. So we don't want the knees in the way of the bar. We want the knees to be close to the bar. That's the key point. We don't want the knees running away from the bar. We want it to make room to you basically want to move around the bar as close to it as possible. So you're almost like dancing around it. You're almost like doing what's that called? Where people go under a stick, whatever thing it's called. I forget. It's like doing that where you're like getting as close as possible to it. So you see here, he's getting really close to it. Whereas by you, let's go to a rep I know I've seen. Yeah, by you really locking those knees out early, you're just completely moving away from it. Which again is the right instinct, but just overdone. So see him here, and then boom, locked out. So again, that's how I can tell, just from his positions alone, I can tell he's in his forefoot the entire time. But again, the key point is the foot pressure is the best cue for all of this, because that's where it all starts, and that's where it's all maintained. Because while you're deadlifting, you can't really think about like, oh, I want to keep my knees forward. Like, it's just too hard to think like that. But what's very easy is to think, okay, my balance a little bit more forward, and then I'm going to push straight up, as opposed to just pulling back. But yeah, your lockout's great. Okay, so yeah, other than that, so what'd you say? I also feel like I twist to my right as I engage my right lat more than my left. So I believe you're pulling hook grip, right? Yeah, you're pulling hook grip, so I don't suspect that's going to be a big issue. Stuff like that could just kind of naturally happen, especially with sometimes the bar just rolls around. And then it can make you feel, because like on your hardest rep, it's not exacerbated. So because of that, I don't think it's a big muscular issue. Because if it's a muscular issue, you should expect it to worsen the harder the rep gets, right? So like if you have a weaker left leg than a right leg, on the first rep, you're not going to see it. And then, but by the last rep, oh man, that left leg is really lagging behind. I don't really see that on your hardest rep here. So I think it's probably a mix of just, there's probably some truth to it in terms of just your movement pattern. But I don't think it's an absolute muscular issue. And I suspect a lot of it's just due to the bar kind of rolling around and all that. Because it is hard to deadlift with bumper plates and to keep everything in place. Like that is difficult. The way that I see it, like kind of rolling around. When you're deadlifting with kilogram plates in a really good competition, platform for powerlifting, it just sticks into place easier. So like, I actually don't think that will be a lifelong issue. I think a lot of that's just kind of balance, but maybe it's 10 to 15% of a real issue. And then like 90% kind of skill and equipment and all that. That would be my gut instinct, but from what I'm seeing. But yeah, in terms of your torso rigidity, it's great. So like I said, it's both. I would like that forefoot pressure, and also I just would like a little bit less of this arch in the back. I think you're just overdoing perfect form a little bit, and that will make it easier to then get more natural and get more quads in the lift and get more of that forefoot. Is you just you do want excellent technique, but you don't want. I mean, this is just picture. It's too picture perfect. It's like a bodybuilding.com model picture where like they're setting them all perfect, but they're not actually. They're just bodybuilders. Whereas like when you see top level powerlifters, I'd say very few, if maybe none, truly maintain that arched position. So we want to get in a position that we know we can actually maintain with a 1 rep max. And I just suspect it's not going to be quite that setup. Like that. I think that's where it's too much. By the time you pull, it's like here is closer to where you want to be at. So imagine if you set up like this, as opposed to that arch, then you would also get into a better leveraged position. If you just set up a little bit longer, like probably right around here, I would say you have less of an arch and it's a little bit more neutral. So if you just set up like that, then you're basically going to have longer arms starting off, and you'll be again in a great position and less likely to be too far back on your heels. Okay, so below are my squats, and they're by far my worst lift form-wise. I seem to have a mobility imbalance in my shoulders, causing my right elbow to get tucked more in a hip shift. Also, I have a good morning squat. Overall, squats never feel natural. Okay, well, never say never, but up until now, yeah. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, I think the key point is you want to stay patient. I do think you're a little bit impatient, especially on that first rep, is to me. So first of all, I think you could control the bottom portion better. So here's what I don't like is I don't like someone to pick up speed going into the hole. So your tempo is fine starting out. So this is a fine tempo, and then, but it's that last 15%. It's almost like you pick up speed a little bit and you crash into the hole. So that I really do not like. So I just keep that same tempo. So yeah, let's imagine this. Yeah, I just think you get loose on that, and you honestly probably do go half an inch deeper than you have to. So see here, like this is a little deeper than you have to for a low bar squat. So I'd say go half inch higher. But the irony is that what you do on the deadlift, you could do on the squat here. So you could use a little bit of that arch. You already do have a pretty good arch here in your back, like really neutral back. But here you could use your hip flexors in that bottom position. So think about using those hip flexors, like the fronts of your hips, basically, tilting your pelvis to where it bottoms out in that bottom position, as opposed to just your knees bottoming out. Because right now you're really letting those knees come forward. So I would like to see your knees just stay here, as opposed to crashing forward like that. I think that crash, because ultimately you come back here anyways. So I think you'll have a far more efficient squat to just go up and down like that. So if you have to very slightly widen your stance in order to do that, then do so. If you can't just make the decision to do it while having the same stance width. So I could see a very, very slightly wider squat. I also do tend to notice that people with like skateboarding shoes tend to do better, or Vans or whatever, than these. I think these are like deadlift slippers, or those are Advances, I think. No, they're probably okay, as long as they have enough lateral support to slightly widen your stance. Because I've noticed that sometimes when people use like deadlift slippers, obviously these aren't totally deadlift slippers, but when they kind of use deadlift slippers like that, they tend to crash more and have more of that forward knee and kind of inward knee crash because they can't push on the outsides of their feet. Also, I'll check to see, I think you're making the same mistake of being too far on the heels initially. So I could see you're kind of raising the toes a little bit here, and the bar's more aligned over the heels. So we want the bar to be more aligned over your midfoot, and then you won't have that crash as much. Because right now, the reason why you're not maintaining this position and you're kind of crashing forward is because see how you're kind of shifting forward because you're too far back on your heels. So again, similar to the deadlift, I want you to shift your whole system more forward and then set everything up to where by the time you're in this position, especially this position, you should not have your knees come any more forward due to the timing, not just due to the absolute position, but due to the timing. And given your squat's not your strongest point, odds are you don't want a super forward knee anyways, because you're probably, strong posterior chain lifter, probably have a little bit longer legs in proportion to your torso. So again, knees don't come any more forward than this. And by shifting your whole system forward, that will help you do that. And then you'll be more in balance and it'll be more straight up and down as opposed to being back on your heels and then crashing forward. But then also if you need to, widen that stance width if needed, while also shifting more forward in terms of your forefoot pressure in preventing those knees from crashing forward. Oh yeah, big time, big time, big time. Yeah, that was the same thing. That was exactly what I was talking about. I love it when something's verified before I know it. So see that forward, look at that bar path. That's the ultimate sign that you're actually too much into your heels because it's jumping forward because that's actually a stronger position is to be more forward. But the problem is when you're too far back in your heels, by the time you make that correction, your balance is thrown off the other way. So now you're going too far back, then too far forward. So a lot of times people mentally will think, oh, I need to go further back on my heels because I'm getting thrown forward. When in reality, it's the total opposite. You want to accept being more forward so that then you can go straight up and down like a jump. So yeah, that's definitely the number one thing. I mean, I think you can make immense progress on your squat by doing those few things. And then also, we want to accept a forward lean. I think that's the biggest thing that you're going to have to deal with is that, look, if you're not built to squat like some people are, and I don't think you have a crazy bad build for squats. I think you could squat a lot. But we need to accept where you're going to be in your strongest position. So again, this does verify the slightly wider stance width may help. So if you're going to send in another form check, send it from the front so I can see exactly what's going on there. Because I suspect a slightly wider stance width, because this knee position definitely is ideal in terms of your strongest point. So that's why we don't want that knee crashing at all. We don't want to think about being on our heels on the eccentric on the way down at all. We want to get more forward on the way down and less forward on the way up. But we have to meet in the middle by doing both, if that makes sense, right? So yeah, I don't know what's going on here. Okay, but yeah, I luckily I actually think there's a lot that you can improve here. Like that's a really, really good thing. Another thing is I would like to just see a little bit more confidence here because I think the way your head position's kind of moving around on the way up, I think it demonstrates that you're a little bit overthinking the speed. So you're kind of looking up, looking down. So like, just make sure that you're really confidently, riding with the weight, and you're not really thinking like, oh, I need to be like kind of pushing this up a little bit faster. And I think that's what tends to happen when you're on your heels too much on the way down. Is it almost feels like, man, this should be moving faster. Like I'm not under the weight, so it almost feels like you're constantly wanting to readjust. But yeah, luckily a lot of that's fixable. I mean, a tremendous amount of that's fixable. So again, even while standing, I want the bar to be more forward. I do want to be very clear on that. While standing, move that bar more forward. So literally just shift the whole system more forward. And that's why you'll have this issue every single rep. Because what happens is, see, now you're thrown forward again. You get thrown forward, you get corrected within the rep, but then across reps, see, this is actually a really good point here, really good lesson here. So see, this is what I want. How you are at the end, this is actually because you're the closest to being aligned because you got thrown into that position. Now let's look at this versus where you're at when you're standing. This is actually a really good example. All right. Well, we can compare this. Okay, not too much of a difference. Let me see if in between reps it was probably even more. Yeah, probably in between this and that. So see, yeah, it's not a crazy difference, but that's how it is. Is that it's not a crazy difference, and you actually could probably be even slightly more forward on this one. But you see how this one it's like everything is going to be more back, and that's the tricky part with the low bar squat. If you stand straight up, the bar will be aligned over your heels. So you do have to make a conscious effort that your whole system is going to be shifted forward such that it's lined over that midfoot. And again, for you, I would really literally think about curling your front toes down into the ground, the whole squat, at least like the first, your big toe, and then maybe, 3 others on each side is really like clamping it down, because then you can never get passive. Because you even see, I know it's a subtle point, but I was peeping it, is that you can even see your feet, your toes literally rise. So like a little bit, like not during the rep, but you see how in between reps, they're kind of coming up, even a little bit during the descent actually. So just very subtly see that toe. I know it's not totally visible for both of them, but that's a good sign that you're, again, not being as active in your forefoot. Like even here, yeah, just the whole time there's a little bit of that toe. And obviously it could have to do with just the shoe itself and all that. but it tends to happen that people who do this, like in between reps, they kind of raise their toes just a little bit because they're really thinking heels, heels, heels. And that's not at all what we want to think about. And it's a nuanced point, but yeah, that'll transform your squat. That'll absolutely transform your squat. And in the long run, we want to always look at your hardest rep and say, what can we do to get your descent in this position? In this position. That's how much I really want you to sit into it. And before I go, if you've never seen this lifter, Tony Harris is the best example of what I'm talking about as far as really finding your powerful position. And here's a squat where he doesn't have as back dominant of a squat as I think would be ideal for you. But look at that. So see how he's not crashing into the squat? He's setting it up and then sitting into it. And look at how forward he is in between reps. So see how he's more forward, and you can just tell he's in his forefoot by the way he's more forward. He's not sitting into his heels. He's accepting being more athletic and more of a straight up and down movement. And see how there's no crashing in that bottom position. And because of that, he has a sustainable squat that is incredible. Let me show you that. This will be the last one. This is a raw squat at he's like 60 years old, squatting 750 pounds, something ridiculous. And look at this. This is picture perfect. This is the type of ability to reflect that going down and going up with the exact same precision that we want. Beautiful. Now, before I go, let me address what you even said. You said, I seem to have mobility issues on my shoulder, causing my right elbow to be more tucked in a hip shift. Yeah, so I would like you to send in a front video on the next form check for sure, so that I could see a little bit more of that. I think these balance points are going to be 90% of it or 95% of it. And then a lot of these other points are going to be really minor. So I think what we could do is we could address on the next one, if you fix this balance point and all that, we could address the security of your actual bar position. I do think actually chalking the bar for squats would be a good idea for you to just really lock that in so that it's as stable as possible. Because I did notice it's as you're getting thrown forward, it's also kind of shifting around on you a little bit. And I think that's mostly just due to the balance point and it being thrown forward in the first place. But I also think that chalk would help if you would, be willing to do that. So that would definitely also help address the good morning issue on top of what we already talked about with controlling the knee position on the way down so that then you're in a position that you can sustain on the way up. And rather than trying to avoid forward lean, we want to embrace it. And the only way we can avoid forward lean is if we widen that stance width. And then that can be a great way to both avoid forward lean and have a more controlled knee position, because the more controlled knee position we already know we have to have. Whereas the forward lean in the stance width, that we can negotiate just a little bit. And it would only be, I would say, 1.5 inches on each side, widening out if we do so, while keeping the exact same knee position I recommended, which is before the crash. Okay. As far as the elbow, I don't think it's a big deal. I think that all these points are these are huge chunks of points. And then the points about elbow and lats, and this is obviously my role as your coach basically here, is to say a lot of that stuff doesn't matter as much as you think. It really doesn't. And that's the funny part. Because if anything, I'm probably nitpicking beyond what you would expect maybe. But then on those things, it's it really doesn't matter. There's all sorts of little things where it's once you sort out the balance, once you sort out these little things, sometimes people just are a little bit uneven too. It's not that big of a deal. But we'll have to see from the front view of, especially if you do a slightly wider stance with squat. And what would be really nice would be if you did front view of your squat now, and then also front view of the slightly wider stance, so that then I can really compare the two. And then a side view of the wider stance, and then a side view of your old style. I think that would be really cool. And when I say old style, I mean your old stance width while still correcting for that knee position. So just embracing the forward lean. So embrace the forward lean with your current stance width, and then have a slightly wider stance width where you're just embracing that limited knee position, but you're also going to naturally slightly reduce that forward lean from that wider stance. Yeah, in both front and side angles for that. But yeah, that's it. So the main thing is to prevent that crash. That's 100% of it. And yeah. So hope this helps. That's it for the form check. Thank you guys for everything. And make sure to continue to spread the word on the Candido Forever program. We're going to get these things rolling. Q&As, submissions, up now. More stuff coming soon. More programs coming soon. More videos coming soon. More support. And I might need to get on that Discord. The idea of having some sort of chat and kind of social media aspect to all this, that definitely will be the next step. So that's it, guys. Take care. Have a great day, guys. Peace.